Hello, everybody. We're gonna get started in maybe 30 seconds. I think there's supposed to be. I've been told there's like 42 signups, which is amazing. I guess. I think maybe that means like 10 people are still missing, but I think we can kind of just get going. I figure Saturday morning people sign up and maybe they don't feel like coming in so early. So just a quick note, I'm just recording my screen. So this is something I do with a lot of my lectures. I like to record it and then maybe put it online if there's actually any, if there's any use out of it. I do that with my class here. So if no one will be there's no camera here, it's just my screen. So if you guys say something in class or if you're not comfortable being in the recording, if we put it online, please talk to me and we'll make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, so that's admin stuff. So yeah, my name is Gene. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for coming out. Most of what I'll be talking about you can find scattered about in these places. So genekogan.com is my website. You can find me in most places under Gene Kogan, Twitter, Instagram, all that. And I like to share a lot of this stuff as I go. So those are good places to kind of be keeping up with it. And then also, this is something new called ml4a.github.io. This is a sort of book that I'm working on, and I'll be telling you more about it later in today's session. It's also on Twitter, ml4a_. This is super new, so it's not necessarily in a very good state right now, but something that I'll be kind of drawing from today. Okay, so this is called the neural aesthetic, and this is actually just what you're looking at is, I just taught a class here at ITP called Machine Learning for Artists. And this is going to be something of a condensed version of that. That was about 12 hours over 6 weeks. Today we have 2.5 to 3 hours in one day, and some new stuff actually to look at. So it's going to be sort of the idea is to kind of take you on a tour of machine learning for artists. There's been a lot of really amazing progress in this field in the last year. And we're going to kind of try to keep up with it. This is going to be very much a broad overview. It's meant to be kind of fun and entertaining. You're going to see a lot of pretty pictures and things like that. And also it's going to be very theory heavy, which is to say that I want the primary goal is for people today to understand how some of these algorithms work, particularly neural networks, which most of this is based off of. And so we won't be doing that much coding, which is unusual from most of my classes. I like to get really dirty into the coding, but I feel like the implementations of these are changing so constantly that it's almost pointless to do that until we have a good grasp of what's going on. And then that'll kind of allow you to keep up with the field because it's in this big state of flux right now. And and you'll see why later. There's new things that this class just ended a month ago or so. And there's completely, I have new materials that were demonstrated in the science only after this class ended. So it's a really, really fast-moving field in that way. So yeah, does anyone have any, I suppose it's too early to ask about questions, but just in general, if you have any questions, just interrupt me, and we can kind of keep this as interactive as possible. Otherwise, I'll just kind of start talking about stuff. Any questions? Okay, cool. Okay, so I'll give you a quick, couple minutes about me, my background and how I got started in machine learning. So anybody recognize one of these two pictures?
Yes.
Which one? Top left or bottom right? Top left. Anyone recognize bottom right? One person, all right, how do you know it?
I went to Columbia and took composition.
All right, cool. Yeah, me too. Okay, so this is Columbia University. It's about 100 blocks north of here. I went to college here, and this is what most people recognize. This is, alma mater, and if you've been up there, it's very nice. It's copper top buildings and very prestigious and regal and everything. But if you go up about 10 blocks north onto 125th Street, you'll see this dumpy-looking building right here. And it turns out that this place is actually really special. So this is Prentice Hall. It's a building associated with Columbia, and it's one of the probably one of the most neglected buildings on campus. I think that's going to change though, because when I got there was just a gas station in front of it. Now there's this big science center, so I think they're going to come renovate it pretty soon. as they call it. So Prentice Hall is where they have the visual arts department and the computer music department, the computer music center. And this is what it looked like in the late 1950s. So this is Milton Babbitt, composer Milton Babbitt, and he's playing the RCA Mark II synthesizer. This was the world's first computer programmable electronic music synthesizer that was made anywhere. So it happened in this building. And actually, it's still, I don't think I have this in the deck, but yeah. But they're there. So these guys are at Columbia's Brad Garton, Terry Pender, Douglas Repetto. This guy started Dorkbot. Maybe some of you guys have heard of that. And this is the same thing, and there it is in all its glory, and it's still kind of working, sort of. Sometimes they'd like to try to play it. And it's got pretty leaky sort of like CRT tubes and everything that's falling apart. But that place hasn't changed that much. And actually, they still have like those old school urinals. I'm trying to. Do you have a picture of those urinals? I've been trying to find it. Yeah, it's like the Marcel Duchamp type, like like the really old school 1940s, 50s. Come in. We have chairs. Okay, so I actually was an engineer, so I was in the engineering school. So this wasn't really my department. This is a music department. But I started hanging out here because I was really interested in like doing electronic music stuff. And one of the things that they were working on when I was an undergrad was this program called MeepSoft. And I have to actually remember how to launch it. I have to, I think it's go here. It's like run me. Yes, run me. Okay, I'm going to show you MeepSoft. Yes, sh. Oh, cd bin sh run me. Okay, so this is MeepSoft. This is an application in Java that they were working on at the time. And what it does is it takes audio and it rearranges it into according to some search or something that you specify. So for example, we have this thing by this guy Chris Mann. I think it sounds like this. So there's this. So this is just an audio file by this guy named Chris Mann, who's a vocal artist, and you'll hear exactly what that means if you listen.
The dance is trying to answer why it looks like something black. Is an emergent property of any system increasing probability of asking the right question? A question that passes off perhaps or no. It's not for quantity. In addition, it's a function that represents information after all that a failure description means
it just goes on like
this. Number of probabilities of real numbers. A bias may be parity in bags. The DAGs is some inductive randomly negative it or tautologies. A square of the propensity to explain any point function as random.
Anyway, so suppose we wanted to take all of that and we wanted to reorder it from highest pitch to lowest pitch. So this is what MeepSoft would do. We could go, okay, we want it to have a high density for the segments, high sensitivity, detect sound events, and we tell it to extract all these features. So these are like audio features, things about the audio like the average pitch, the average power in each of the frequency bins, MFCCs. These are all sort of like audio stuff. So let's take pitch, and we'll compose in the simple sort. So it'll go from low to high, let's say. So if we do that, and then I click go, and this is my favorite part about this, when you click go and it starts to analyze, it just starts flashing random colors at you.
Is that based on the sample that you're analyzing?
It's based on nothing.
Okay.
It's just random. Yeah. And actually, this is maybe, before I show you this is my favorite part about it because like I was like 20 at the time and I couldn't program and I didn't know anything about audio. And this was super campy. And I think that made it very approachable for me. And I felt like I could sit there and like just listen and maybe ask questions occasionally. It was just a bunch of graduate students, so everyone was much older than me. And the professors there was Douglas Repetto, who's an artist, and Dan Ellis, who's an electrical engineering researcher who studies signal processing and machine learning. So like music information retrieval is his field, which is like the application of machine learning to audio. So that for me was like really a big revelation because there's like a partnership between an artist and a scientist and a bunch of graduate students who had a sense of humor about it, as you can see. So if we go to the visualizer, what we've done is we've taken all of those chunks of him and we've rearranged them so they go from lowest to highest. So now we can actually play it. Let's play.
The reason that something is example. Oh, how is it time
Oh, wait. Sorry. It should be this one. That's the original one, yeah. Okay, now it's going from low to high, yeah. I forget if you can fast forward. Oh, yeah. Let's go all the way to the end here. Let's see. So that's MeepSoft. There's actually only a very small bit of machine learning going on in here, which is some of the stuff that Dan added to it. But for me, that was kind of like my introduction to machine learning, was in this sort of musical artistic context. So that for me was kind of like, yeah, big revelation. So, okay, let's get out of this. Okay, so like a couple of years later, I started working in this field, music information retrieval, and I was doing things like this. So this is maybe like 2010 or so, and I was doing it here, in fact. This is my first experience at NYU, which was at Steinhardt. Any of you guys at Steinhardt? The music technology school? Anyhow, it's right over here, just a few blocks away. And I was working for Professor Juan Bello, and we were working on this product called SourceTone, which was an emotional radio, like a radio that would play internet radio station that would play you music based on what emotion you request. So like I want, very high energy music, or I want very melancholy music, or I want relaxing music, things like that. And it's kind of an atypical problem for machine learning. We usually don't want to solve such subjective questions. But it turns out that there's a lot of interesting machine learning you could do to figure out questions like, well, what is the sort of emotional color of this music? And I was producing graphs like this. So this, what you're looking at, this graph over here, the big one, shows tags from Last.fm. How many of you guys know Last.fm? You know that internet radio? Most people, okay. You can tag music. And so you can actually do a lot of things like clustering different tag words together based on how much they co-occur in different songs. And so you see that like sentimental, sadness, emotional, intense, all of these kind of cluster together. And then you have like a chill out sort of area here, rainy day, sleepy. So you see a lot of the sort of words kind of cluster together, and this is kind of interesting for me. We were using what's called principal component analysis, which is like this dimensionality reduction technique. This was before we had things like t-SNE, which some of you guys may have heard of if you're interested in this material, which has made it a lot easier actually. So I'm going to show you that stuff later. Okay, so I started doing this kind of work, and I found that like I was not really such a good research scientist, because every time I'd learn a new algorithm, I'd want to do something like weird or interesting with it. So I learned about these things called self-organizing maps, which again are like in today they're kind of obsolete now, but 5-10 years ago they were really cool. So what self-organizing maps do is they take high-dimensional data and they plot it in 2 or 3D, so that similar data clusters together. I'm going to show you a quick demonstration of that. I wrote this in processing way back. This I think only works in processing 2.2. Not in 3. I tried it in 3, but let's see. So let's open this up. So suppose you get this. Oh, that doesn't work. Hang on. It was a different one. This one. Hooray. Okay. So suppose we click one of these flowers. Let's take this one. It will start with like a random colored pixels, and then it will do the following procedure. It will sample a color from this image, find the nearest pixel to that color, and then adjust that pixel and all of its neighbors such that it becomes more like the pixel we sampled. And we do this repeatedly, and then what you start to see is it starts to converge into this sort of distribution of colors, where similar colors are clustered together. So maybe like one that's a little more colorful might make more sense. So like something like this, maybe. And it's kind of weird, non-deterministic. So you see, like, it looks like there's kind of two purple zones. So in a better, these should probably be closer to each other, but it's kind of, it's a bit of a chaotic process. So what I did was I applied this algorithm to Google image searches. And I looked up a whole bunch of words, and I downloaded the, let's say, first 100 or so images in each of these Google image searches. And then I applied a self-organizing map to those colors. And so this is sort of the idea is like, what is the color of these words? When we talk about them, do we sort of see a color, or do we perceive that it has some relationship to some group of colors? And so like you can look at the top, it's the seasons. So winter is very sort of white and blue. Spring, summer, fall. Fall is very orangey. These are different like biomes. So rainforest is like this deep green, and a desert has a lot of brown in it. These are holidays, so Valentine's Day is all pink, St. Patrick's Day is all green. These are different fruits and vegetables, Aurora Borealis, day and night. These are some films that I did. I remember when I saw the movie Minority Report, Spielberg was talking about how he had like a blue tint over the entire movie, and I wondered if I could if I take frames from the movie, if I could actually discover that, and I think I slightly did. Democrats and Republicans look exactly the same. Not much has changed, it seems. Yeah, and so on. So that was kind of like the kind of stuff I was doing. Oops. All right. So around this time, I discovered processing in open frameworks, which most people here probably know of. Raise your hand if you know open frameworks. Raise your hand if you've used. Raise your hand if you use processing. Okay. Raise your hand if you haven't heard of open frameworks. Curious. Okay, a couple people. All right. Most people here will know this. So open frameworks and processing are both these creative coding frameworks that make it a lot easier to make art and design and things like that. And this is some stuff that I made with it. So I did this residency at this place called IBeam last year, along with this guy right here is Colin Self. Who is a musician and a sort of performer, and also we had a partner, Lisa Corey Chung. So the three of us were residents at IBeam, and we were making these tools for performance. And I was really interested at the time in projection mapping and projection mapping on moving things. So I was looking at a lot of this like projection mapping on dancers' bodies and then theatrical people and things like that. And we kind of started making this like open source toolkit to enable musicians and artists to use it. And there's Colin kind of messing with it, as you can see. And I have different versions of this. He's on tour with Radiohead right now. It's like yeah. I did it in both, yeah. I have a library called Connect Projector Toolkit in processing, which might be a little out of date. Like it definitely works in processing too, but it's been a bit neglected over the last year or so. And then I have an add-on in open frameworks called OFX Connect. Yes. I was not though. There's other libraries that do the same thing. This is a well-worn idea, but hopefully I've made it easier. And yeah, this kind of has projection mapping on robots and things like that. This is a robot. This is flocking, like Boyd's. Dan Shipton does this really well. So yeah, processing in open frameworks. And I kind of took this stuff that I learned from machine learning, and I tried to apply it into open frameworks. And I made this add-on called OFX Learn, which was the first add-on library that I made for open frameworks that supports machine learning. And the funny thing is that I didn't use it for 3 years, because I put it online in 2012 because I just got into open frameworks and I thought maybe this might be useful for open frameworks, but at the time maybe it was a little premature because we didn't really have a lot of real-time uses for machine learning. So we kind of let it be here. But this is anyhow, this is kind of a nice transition because this will lead us into the material. So we're gonna now talk about machine learning. So it's gonna become a lot less funny, maybe. Well, there's some funny stuff in there too. But now let's talk about machine learning. So, what is machine learning? So everyone here came ostensibly because they're interested in machine learning. Raise your hand if you got interested in machine learning before this year? Okay, a bunch of people. How many people have taken a machine learning class before? Okay, a couple people. How many people have used machine learning in a project before? Cool. Excellent. Can you tell me about it, you guys?
I was in the data incubator, the data science program. So I did all sorts of things like text analysis and decision trees and random forests and neural networks.
Cool. What's up?
I used it for election fraud.
Election fraud?
Yeah, to
Okay.
detect different parts of characteristics like polling station results.
Did you find anything?
Yeah, some, yep.
And did you, was there actions taken?
Yeah,
Okay, cool. That's it. Very interesting. There must be a lot of this going on now. Okay.
and digit analysis.
Yeah. So I suppose that might be something, sometimes we hear anomaly detection
Yeah.
is the kind of, So like trying to find, that's like also like credit card fraud would be a good example of this. So like looking for things that don't match, that seems suspicious. Okay, so this is basically machine learning, or at least one side of it. Most of what we're going to look at is supervised and unsupervised learning, and then there's a third branch of machine learning called reinforcement learning, which we'll also talk about a bit. And supervised and unsupervised learning, very broadly speaking, start with the following problem. Let's say you're programming a computer, and you need to program a function which does something. Like let's say you're making a banking system, and you need to program a computer so that when you input a check or something, it will find the correct account and deposit the money. So if you do that, that's the kind of thing that a computer programmer should know instantly how to do. It's like a very well-defined task, and we can think of an algorithm that would do that reasonably well. In machine learning, the problem that we start with is when we receive a task that we don't know how to do, or we don't know how to program explicitly. So, for example, let's say you want to build a program which learns to predict the weather. So, for example, you measure the temperature and the humidity and atmospheric pressure and all these other climate details, and then you want your program to predict how much it's going to rain today. So that's something that is much more difficult to do explicitly using in code, right? You can think to make a whole bunch of rules, like if you guys are coding, you have your for statements, your for loops, and your if statements. You could be like, oh, if temperature is above X, and if humidity is below, Y, and rules like that. But you can see, I can already see how skeptical you are. This is not going to work very well for rain prediction. Because there's just really no clear way to program a bunch of rules to predict the rain. So this is a perfect problem for machine learning. And the premise of supervised and unsupervised learning is, from a computer science standpoint, it's kind of like designing functions which tune themselves automatically so that they do the task very well. So in the function, it accepts some fixed input, a bunch of arguments, right? And then it outputs some fixed output, a decision or returns a value or something like that. And the job of machine learning is to make the function itself. And we start by creating a data structure which is theoretically possible to model any input to output mapping, to sort of tune itself so as to create any potential functional mapping. And then we use examples to train it so that it finds the correct mapping. If that sounds very abstract, it'll become a little more concrete when we start looking at examples. So usually we think of this as in two different ways. One is classification. So let's say you have a whole bunch of data points in 2D, green, red, and blue. You can design a machine learning system to classify unknown points. So I'm moving my mouse around, and it's telling me what class it belongs to. So this is classification. Regression is the same thing in some sense, except it's predicting a continuous value instead of a discrete value. like a class. And clustering is there's no labels, there's nothing to predict. There's just a whole bunch of unlabeled points, and we wanna group them together. So this is what you would call unsupervised learning. Unsupervised means there's no labels, and we're just sort of interested in organizing data. So let's talk about neural networks and how they can kind of achieve these goals for us. So neural networks these are actually not neural networks. These are myoblasts or mycelium. They're like muscle cells or something. My friend who's a neuroscientist took this picture and sent it to me. But you know what? I actually have, these are actual neurons. Yeah, there's a brain bow. I just learned about this recently. A couple of years ago, I think the technique for this was a person won a Nobel Prize. They like inject phosphorescent like nano something. I don't know. This is not my specialty. So anyhow, these are neurons. So neural networks are called neural networks because they're kind of inspired by the brain, and they're very loosely inspired. And actually, if you'll really sort of annoy a neuroscientist, I don't have that slide. Oh, I missed that slide. Okay, I'll tell you that in a second. So the analogy is that your brain is made up of trillions of neurons, and they are all interconnected. And this is how you process information in your brain. And neurons are also the building blocks of neural networks. But the analogy should not be taken too far, because by now computer scientists have abandoned the idea most of them have of mimicking the brain. Neural networks are actually very different in some very categorical ways from brains. So we kind of use it as a sort of inspiration and terminology. Some people don't like it. Like neuroscientists, you might annoy neuroscientists if you play the analogy up too far. Neural networks have been thought of for a long time. So like everyone knows Ada Lovelace, first software programmer. And you don't often see a lot of quotes from Ada Lovelace, and I thought I'd dig some up. And there's one that I really liked. It's about a calculus of the nervous system that she described like 100 years before we kind of implemented these. So that's maybe like the genesis of neural networks. Okay. Also, so everyone is very excited about machine learning this year. There's a lot of hype building up. This is not new. This is from the New York Times. And this is on page 23 of the New York Times in 1958. I wish I could say it's the front page, but it's just page 23. Nevertheless, the Navy revealed the embryo of an electronic computer today that it expects will be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and be conscious of its existence. Yes, that's very, very prescient words by the New York Times in 1958. And actually, Alan Turing said that by the year 2000, we'd be able to build machines that were smarter than human beings. Year 2000, yeah, which is the same year we had Y2K. Everybody remember that? I always like to include that, just so that we don't get ahead of ourselves in the hype cycle. Oh, here's that annoying neuroscientist thing, yeah. So like the idea is that neurons send information to each other, and you'll have one neuron which collects input from a number of neurons and kind of sums them up, and it gets this sort of sum total of electronic energy, which we call action potential in brains. I'm glad. Is anyone here a neuroscientist or has done neuroscience?
I've learned a little.
Okay.
My department in Brazil is arts and neuroscience, and I'm the art part, and I always know.
Okay, great. I'm glad your scientist compatriots are not here. So let's look at an actual. Oh, I should have. Let's look at this thing here. This is better. So this is the building block of a neural network. This is a neuron, and it actually is incredibly simple. So like the way that neural networks and most machine learning algorithms are able to create such sort of compelling and interesting and dynamic behavior is that we have millions and millions of these, and you can create a very dynamic system by combining them. But a single neuron works really simply. All it does is it takes these three values. Let's say we're this neuron right here, and there's three neurons connecting to it, and they all have some value, just a regular random, not random, but it has a number value. So we take those and we take a weighted sum of them. So the x1 times w1, x2 times w2, x3 times w3. We sum those together, and then we add one more term called the bias. And the bias is sort of not super important for our discussion today, so you can almost pretend it doesn't exist. It's mostly like of mathematical convenience, and so it's not going to be too important. But the main thing is that a neuron is, W1 is going to be W1 x1 plus W2 x2 plus W3 x3. And then it does one more thing, which is that it goes through this activation function, which takes this sum, and usually it squashes it. So like usually we use a sigmoid, or actually we don't really use sigmoids anymore, but this is how for many decades we used sigmoids to squash them. So suppose you have some really large value. All it does is it takes whatever can go into here, and it squashes it between 0 and 1 using the sigmoid function. So this is 1 over 1 plus e to the negative whatever went into that neuron. This seems super complicated, but it actually isn't. All it does is, whatever this value is, it just turns it into something between 0 and 1. And it turns out that nowadays we actually don't use these anymore. Now we use ReLU usually, which is rectified linear unit, which sounds really complicated, but all it is this formula. It just if it's negative, it makes it 0. That's it. The reasons why we do this is mostly beyond the scope of the class. It's sort of like mathematical trickery to make these things nonlinear is kind of the goal, because nonlinear functions like this is a nonlinear function, are capable of modeling arbitrary input-output sort of functional mapping relationships. That's very wordy, but that's kind of why we do this, and that's what makes these things so powerful, is that they're theoretically capable of modeling any arbitrary function, and the job of machine learning is to discover what that function is, because there are many candidates, and it's really hard to search through them, and so we kind of use some techniques which we'll get into for doing that. So that's a neuron, and where's my neural network? These are out of order, sorry. Let's look at, let's do a forward pass. Yeah, look at this demo. So here I'm going to get into ml4a. This is, I'll show this a little more carefully later, but this is a book that I'm beginning to write about machine learning for artists, so encourage everyone to kind of check in with it. As you can see, I have already delayed the launch date several times. This might happen again. But I have all these demos, which might be of use. This will be a lot more interesting looking when I get around to adding some HTML to it. So let's do a forward pass. This is a really basic neural network. So we initialize it with random weights and biases. So all of these connections have random weights. And then what we'll do is we get an initial input. So these are just some random numbers. And then we'll do the first one. We go to this neuron here, and we compute the weighted sum of these. So this is W times this, so this times this, plus this times this, plus this times this, plus the bias term, which you can kind of ignore, and then the sigmoid, and then we get this value negative 0.38. It's the precise formula is not super important. What you really want to know is every neuron, the more it receives, the more it outputs. So the bigger these inputs are, the bigger this will be. But that's, of course, mitigated by these weights. So the bigger the weights are, the more value you'll receive into this neuron. And then that's actually the principal thing, is really the weights. So the bigger these weights are, the bigger this will be. And that'll become important later when we see how we set these things up. This what we're looking at is just like a bland data structure. It's not doing anything yet. We're going to show how you would use this to your advantage in just a couple slides. But let's just finish the forward pass. So you do this for this neuron, then we'll do it for this one. And then we go to the next layer, and then we do the same thing for this one. So this is 0.55 times negative 0.38 plus 0.84 times 0.29 plus this bias, and then you get an output value. So these input values produce this output value. Yep?
I think it's the same thing. It flattens it out between 0 and 1.
Yes, it does it? Or wait, sorry.
That's the sigma equation up in the top right corner.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, that's sigma, the other one. The
Yeah,
radio, you're thinking of radio.
Yeah. But wait, actually, you're right. Is this a bug? This might be actually be a bug. Let's see. 1 divided by 1 plus 2.71 raised to the negative, what was it? 0.38? Yeah, wait, this is wrong. I think you're good call. I think this should be between 0 and 1. Good point. I'm gonna write that, fix sigma. These are my notes. Okay, so, okay, yeah, good call. So that's been like that for months, I think. So anyway, let's actually now let's continue. So yeah, it should be between 0 and 1. Anyway, how do we use this in an actual application? So suppose we have we want to learn, let's look at these actually. Wait, not that. MNIST random sample. So we have this data set called MNIST, which is a very popular data set in machine learning experiments, and it's a bunch of handwritten digits, right? So these are all made by people, and they're 28 by 28 pixels, and they're labeled. So we have like expert labels. So all of the 2s are labeled 2, all of the 1s are labeled 1, and so on. A good question to start with for training a neural network is, how do we train it so that it is able to accurately, how do we use a neural network so that it's able to classify handwritten digits? So the way you would do that, and just remember the forward pass demo, we're going to set up a neural network architecture so that we can classify MNIST digits. Now recall, most of you probably know that an image is just a set of pixels, which is just a bunch of numbers. So MNIST, this sample right here, the 3, just looks like this. It's just a bunch of numbers. The blacks are all 0, and then the the brighter the intensity of the pixel, the brighter color it is. And so we can take these values. There's 784 of them because it's 28 by 28 pixels. So we have 784 numbers which represent each image. So all of these numbers, when we look at it, we see a 3. It's like instant, right? But to a computer, it's 784 numbers. So to go from that to this is a 3 is going to be very difficult using conventional programming means. So this is how we would set up a neural network. We would give it an architecture which allowed the pixels to be the inputs. So we would have 784. Before we had 3 in that forward pass. Now we have 784 of them. And then the neural network is set up in the following way. We would have our 784 pixels. I've cut it off for brevity, so there's actually a lot more of these. Otherwise, it would just be a big mess. So there's 784 of these. And then neural networks can have 1 or more, or sometimes 0, what are called hidden layers. So these are neurons that are not inputs or outputs, they're just in the middle of the network. So for this one, we have 1 hidden layer, which has 15 neurons. And then we have 1 output layer, which has 10 neurons. The key thing is that we've set this up so that it has 10 neurons in the output layer because we assign each of these to be one of the digits. So this this neuron is assigned to 0, this neuron is assigned to 1, this is 2, and so on. And we want to set up we want the weights in the network to be such that when we do a forward pass from these pixels to the end outputs here, that the 9 neuron gets the highest score. That's what we want, right? And we also want so that when an 8 goes in, the 8 neuron would have the highest score, and so on. Yeah.
Does it give back like a level of confidence?
Sorry?
Does it return a value like a level of confidence?
Yes. So it doesn't have to. We can set it up however we want. But what we're looking at here is that there's some bells and whistles that I'm glossing over. But this is we set this up using the last thing that happens is logistic function, which squashes it into a probability. It's proportional to just raw values, but then we kind of sum them so that they're equal to 1, and divide them by the sum so everything adds up to 1, so that you can interpret it as a probability. Yeah. Another question people often have at this point is, why are there 15 neurons here? And the reason is arbitrary. So you kind of have to select that when you design the architecture, and we may talk a little bit about questions like that. Those are what you call hyperparameters, which are, I think they should be called metaparameters personally, but they're called hyperparameters for whatever reason. And hyperparameters are like things that you have to select before you do the training, before you do the machine learning part. And people do this on various intuitions, or you can do experiments to try to figure out how many it should have, because it's not always obvious what will work better. It's questions of architecture. And other questions of architecture is like, how many hidden layers should there be? So those are all sort of things that a machine learning scientist might be dealing with on a regular basis, but we will probably kind of like approach it from a very summarial level.
What does the hidden layer do?
So yeah, it's a good question. I haven't really talked about that. Let me punt that and then get back to that in a second, because what'll happen is I'm going to show a 1-layer neural network, and then in the next slide, and then we'll see. Then I'll talk about what a second layer could do to improve it. It makes the short answer is it makes the network much more flexible. Like it can create. It has a lot more ability to tune itself to get the input-output mapping we desire. Yeah.
So like the pixels on the left are dictated by the quality of the pixel in the image, like whether it's a 0 or a 200, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about the weights? How do you decide on what the weight is?
So that comes from training, and that we'll get to. Yeah. So initially the weights are random. You have a question? Oh.
Yeah, I have a question. I just you're working in black and white, right? Because you have all the pixels. So what numbers do you go from 0 to 255? And have all the grayscale numbers there? How does it work?
Yeah, they're grayscale values.
Yeah,
so like
grayscale.
255 is 0. Is white, and then 0 is black, and that's kind of
So you go
the
from 0 to 255.
yeah, which is the standard representation of colors in computers. It can also be 0 to 1. You know, if you wanted to assign, it doesn't really matter. It's like arbitrary. As long as you have a consistent interpretation, then we typically use 0 to 255 for colors.
So if you want colors, you have to have 3 of them, right? So where
Yeah,
do you go?
and we'll see that also. So when we have color values, it works the same. We just have 3 times as many. Yeah. We were talking just now about training. We'll get to training. That'll also be one of the slides. Okay, so actually, and then that's good transition. Let's look at an MNIST forward pass, just to see these in action. Actually, we basically just looked at this, so we can kind of skip this. Yeah, actually, I'm going to skip this and go to the next thing. Let's look at these. Demo MNIST weights. Yes. Okay. Okay, so check this out. This is, I'm going to start at the beginning. So this is, let's say we set up a 1-layer neural network. There's no hidden layers here. We're just going straight from all the pixels to 10 outputs, and we want it to have the behavior that we were just talking about, where big values are the correct answer. The way that we get it to have the behavior that we want is called training. So you hear this a lot, training a neural network or training a machine learning algorithm. And training means we take a whole bunch of examples that have the correct answer, and we use those to adjust the weights so that the behavior of our network matches what we expect it to do. So initially, when we set this up, it's just a data structure, all of these weights are going to be random. And so when we pass in a random number, a random image, its behavior will be totally random, right? But what we can do is every time we observe a new sample, we see, okay, this is what it gave us. we want it to give us this. So like for this 5, in our ideal world, all of these would be 0 except for the 5 neuron, which is 3, 4, 5, this one, because it starts at 0, I guess. I forgot. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this one. So we want this to be very high. So using some math, mostly just actually pretty standard calculus, multivariate calculus, we can actually use calculus to adjust all of the weights so that the network next time becomes slightly more likely to give a higher score for this and a lower score for the others. And we do this repeatedly. And we don't have any way of doing it all at once. We do it through many, many examples. And again, like a really detailed explanation of how this works is a bit beyond the scope of today, is very interesting. And it's kind of the central problem in scientific research. But is a little bit like we would need a whole lecture for just that probably. So we won't talk about it too much, but I will show you a little bit about what it looks like. So I'm going to run this. There's a 20-second long demo, and what's going to happen is we're going to start showing this network examples, and then its accuracy is going to gradually get higher as we do. And another thing is these. We're going to look at, I haven't explained what these boxes are. I'm going to discuss those I'm going to discuss those actually right now. So what these are is they are the weights themselves. We're visualizing the weights of this network, and each of these boxes is associated with each neuron, output neuron. So let's look at this one right here. Remember, there are 784 weights connecting to it. It looks like there's a lot less because we've skipped most of them, but there's a lot of them, 784. And there's one for each pixel, right? So there's a weight for each pixel that goes into this neuron. So if we visualize them, if we color them so that the lowest weights are black and the highest weights are white, we get images like this, right? And we can line them up, even though this is like a whole column, we can visualize them in the same configuration as the images, so 28 by 28. And why we do that will become obvious in a second when we see them. But each of these pixels, so for example, like this one all the way up here, the top one corresponds to this line right here, the weight of this line. And the second weight right here is going to be the second pixel here. So does that make sense? So what happens when we start to adjust the weights from training is the following. And look closely because you might miss it, actually. So it happens really quickly. So now the weights are adjusting. And if you look closely at these weights, this will top out around 90%, which sounds great. You know, you get a 90% in your test and you're really pleased. But for a neural network predicting digits, that's really bad, unusable. And our best systems now are the best systems for predicting MNIST get an accuracy of 99.98%, which is better than humans, actually. Because it turns out sometimes digits are ambiguous. You'll make some mistakes, more than once out of every 10,000. So the weights, you can tell pretty much what's going on here, right? These weights seem to look like the digits themselves, right? So like this kind of looks like a 0, this looks like a 1, a 2, and we can kind of, let's just watch this again. You'll see it happens really quickly, and then it kind of spends the rest of the time converging on the smoother representation of this. Yeah?
You know what's interesting? We were talking about synthesizing before, and the painter, an oil painter with fiber glass, said that's the same ratio that the paints evolve when you're painting. At first, think that it's not very random, very structured, but actually we spend the rest of the month just working on the details that people
training a neural network. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So let's try to get some intuition why the weights end up looking like this. There's kind of a good intuitive explanation for it, right? So let's suppose we're the 0 neuron, and it's just useful to anthropomorphize sometimes. So we're 0 neuron. or this guy, and this neuron wants to be have a high score whenever we show it pictures of zeros, and it wants to have a low score when we show it pictures of other numbers. Right? That's the way we would get good performance out of this. So one way of doing that is to adjust the weights in such a way that pixels which tend to be on in zeros have high weights, and pixels which tend to be off in zeros have low weights. And that's why you see kind of like a hole in the middle that's black, and then brightness around where zeros tend to happen. Because then I sometimes think of this as like a stamp. It's almost like you take the digit and then you stamp it on the weights, and wherever the ink in the digit overlaps with the ink in the stamp, you'll get more ink. And when they don't overlap, you get less ink. Something like that. I don't know if that's a very good analogy, but it kind of works for me. And so this will tend to be high for zeros. And then this will tend to be high for ones. This will tend to be high for twos because it tends to overlap with where twos are going. So you'll get, when you have high numbers multiplied by high numbers, so a pixel that's on times a high weight, you'll get a high score. And you'll get a low score for when they don't line up. Yeah?
So even in the white space is like, if there's a drawing essentially in that space, it's a high probability to lose the number that you expect.
Yeah.
So it's like a 1 might have a flag or a base. The middle part is one big with other things.
Yeah, and like, maybe there's other features in ones that are missing here because maybe they don't occur enough to be sort of, this is a very average sort of thing. One thing that people often ask is, why is it sort of gray on the outside rather than black? So that's like a good question people often ask. Because it's black on the inside of the zero, but it's sort of gray and noisy on the outside. And the reason is that it's not so much that it wants pixels to be black, weights to be black for when they don't co-occur with a number, or that's incomplete. It wants to be black for pixels which occur in other digits, but not in this one. So because there tends to be not any digits on the outside area for any of these, there's no reason for it to actually, conclusively say, I want this to be a low weight to devalue this pixel. And that's why they tend to be sort of noisy on the outside. Something like that. Okay. That's a one-layer neural network. Go back to the slide. So if you squint, yeah, it kind of looks like this. But, okay, we'll get to it later. But let's see, is there... Okay, so this is a good opportunity to answer the question from before. Why have multiple layers? So neural networks fail because they might make simplistic assumptions about classes. So if we're looking at this, MNIST weights, so we look at this, right? And this is fine for numbers, but it doesn't work that well. And you might imagine that it might have some confusion between different classes. So for example, 9s and 8s, they both share this sort of top loop over here. And so a lot of 8s and 9s get confused with each other. One way of making for a better, more accuracy in the classifier is by having another layer here. If you have another layer, you give the network a sort of flexibility to learn what this will seem abstract when I describe it right now. When we start talking about convolutional neural networks, this will become a little more concrete. But we want to give it the opportunity to learn a sort of composition, like that zeros and 8s and 5s are, rather than being just a template with some particular shape to it, we can think of it as multiple templates that kind of combine together in various ways. So like a 9, you might think of as a loop plus a line. And in this current approach, we force the networks to recognize everything in one layer. If we have multiple layers, we give it a chance to actually do it a little differently. And this will be, again, when we start to look at convolutional neural networks, this will make more sense. Yeah.
This is also useful because that's how
Japanese actually kanji words.
Mm-hmm.
For us at first, but since we don't speak Japanese, we think it doesn't exist. I think it's all a single thing. It's like a dumb machine learning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's actually made of different images that they always repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Like a tree is actually a forest, like 3 times forest, or
Mm-hmm.
like all there are signs of repeat. And the Japanese or people who write in kanji or in Chinese, they know how to write it because they have several different classes already for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they don't just see like one big squiggly drawings. They know all the tiny little things because
Right.
they repeat several
Mhm.
times.
And actually, we'll see that later. I did a project with those as well, using machine learning. So that'll actually be something that becomes appropriate later. Yeah.
Just refresh my memory.
Mhm.
When I use my brain, I have this input by seeing something number one. So that goes through my eyes into my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can say number one, and that goes through my ears into my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can actually visualize what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't totally understand how do you get all those numbers in there. Is that something you're scanning number one?
How we get the into the
And the
neural.
information into the neurons. Is that an image you have?
It's an image, yeah. So we have a data set, which we use for training machine learning algorithms. It was collected by hand. We had people handwrite numbers, and we gave them all labels, and then we now use them to train our algorithms.
Have you combined those with sound at the same time by saying, here you see number one, and here the word number one? Have you combined that in this whole case?
I think there is work and research that combines input, visual and audio as inputs. I don't know offhand, but I think people are working on that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's see. Before I talk about Wekinator, is there? Okay. Yeah, I'll just mention Wekinator really quick. We're actually not going to do Wekinator today because it's not enough time. But this was part of my course for those of you who are following it. So, and I just want to include slides like this to show you along the way things that you can do that might interest you if you get into this stuff. So everything we've learned already, we've learned already enough to understand how Wekinator works. And Wekinator is this application. Raise your hand if you've heard of Wekinator. Sorry. Yes, apparently my phone is. So, let's see. Wekinator is this application. Wait, sorry. Who has heard of it? Just one person? 2 people? Okay, so most people haven't heard of it. Okay. Wekinator is a really great program made by Rebecca Febrink, who used to be at Princeton, now is at Goldsmiths in London. And it's this application that looks like this, very inconspicuous looking application, that lets you, it's this interface that lets you create, lets you basically do machine learning on your computer using applications that you're already familiar with. So it's generally aimed at musicians and artists, especially musicians, but anyone can really use it. And the way it works is that it creates this interface for different applications in your computer to communicate via Open Sound Control, OSC. Raise your hand if you are not familiar with OSC. Okay, so let me just mention that briefly. Open Sound Control is it's like a network protocol based off of what's called UDP. It's just a way that networks on the internet exchange the data. It's just a protocol. And OSC is this format which was created so that applications, both hardware and software, which need to communicate with each other in for example, like a musical workstation and a synthesizer or something, and Ableton Live and different sound makers. They all typically can support OSC so that they can communicate with each other. So you can have one interface control one instrument, things like that. And it's actually been widely adopted for other purposes too, not just music. So all of the creative coding frameworks, processing, open frameworks, they all support it pretty much out of the box. And Wekinator lets you use those to train like basic neural networks to do on like real-time machine learning. I'll actually do, like, let's do a quick demonstration. I'm going to really quickly, if I can remember exactly how, I haven't done it in a couple weeks. Stop this. Yeah, next slide. Okay, yeah, let me show you Wekinator real quick. So with Wekinator, I want to, actually this might take too long. It'd be better if I just show you, yeah, I'll just show you this is what we were looking at just now. Oh, there's two of these. Let's just look at this one right here. This is what I was going to show you, but it'll take too long to set up, so I just want to mention it. This is me in front of a webcam, and I'm using Face Tracker. It's like an open frameworks application that tracks your face, right? And I'm taking all the data, like this mesh that's tracking my face, and I send it to Wekinator, and those become the inputs to a neural network. So this is like 100-something points that goes to a neural network, and I assign it to a set of output points which control Ableton Live. So Ableton Live is a music-making application, and you have all your instruments and your sounds and your filters and whatever. And if you adjust different values like knobs, you affect the sound. So what we do here is I map Face Tracker as an input to a neural network, and then the outputs control Ableton. And then, so as I move my face around, I change the sound of Ableton. So you can kind of see that going on. You can kind of see the correspondence, right? So the neat thing about this is that you can train these things so that like however you want your instrument to react to your inputs, it will do that for you. So that's kind of a neat thing about Wekinator, and it's really easy to get started with. It's generally targeted to people who have never been exposed to machine learning at all, and who are just interested in music stuff. So it's a really excellent application. Definitely encourage you guys to check it out. One of my classes for the ITP class was all Wekinator, so week 2. These are all online, by the way, and I'll mention that when I show you ml4a. But all of that is online, so you can definitely feel free to check out that lecture if you're interested in Wekinator. It's a really nice way to get started, and would be a good follow-up to if you want to kind of take this further after today. That's a good way to start. So this is Face OSC, which is like an application using Face Tracker that sends all of the data through OSC, and then Wekinator just takes OSC. So there's actually no coding here involved. In this video was made without any coding. Just download Face OSC. It does tracks your face. Download Wekinator that accepts OSC, and then it outputs OSC. And then I had some stuff to, I'm using Ableton here, but it can be other things, right? So you might be using, if you're a musician, you might be using other software. If you're using processing, you might be drawing generative graphics. Processing takes OSC. So there's really lots of things you can do. The lecture is much more, there's a 2-hour, I have a whole 2-hour lecture about this, so that might be a good way to, if you're interested in it. Okay, let's first of all check time. How are we doing on time? It is 12:15, so we started at 11:10. So let's go and for another 15 minutes, and then we'll take a break. Right? It's customary to take a break, and then we'll second half. So let's get into convolutional neural networks. Okay. So first of all, that was a lot, right? How's everyone feeling? How are neural networks feeling pretty good about neural networks? At least the basics are understood. So it turns out that everything that I showed you about neural networks is basically wrong. So forget it, all of it. It's all useless. That's an exaggeration. That's not true. Actually, neural networks are fine, but ordinary neural networks that we just looked at are sort of insufficient for most really large-scale problems. And for a long time, people were actually really quite down about neural networks. So in the 1970s and 80s, they really kind of hit this wall where people couldn't figure out how to make them perform better, and they weren't really scaling into other domains. And so even through the early 2000s, this was true. So like when I got into machine learning, just, this is now, let's say 2008, all my professors were like, yeah, you shouldn't really use neural networks. They're not really like, they kind of hit a wall 30 years ago. And at that time, we had other methods that had been developed called like support vector machines and like decision trees and random forest and so on. You mentioned some of those, which had been kind of like had taken the mantle of most industrial and commercial scale machine learning. And neural networks are kind of on the sidelines for a while. But recently, and by recently I mean really pretty much since like 2012 and really especially since like 2015, neural networks have become dominant again, as they were in the 1960s. And that has been enabled primarily by two kinds of neural networks, which we're going to talk about both to some degree. One is convolutional neural networks, which are these things here. And the second is recurrent neural networks. Raise your hand if you've heard of convolutional neural networks. Okay, a couple of people. Raise your hand if you've heard of recurrent neural networks. Okay, just a little bit. So these are two kinds of neural networks which inherit everything that we've learned so far. So you don't have to forget any of it because all of these work exactly like ordinary neural networks. They just add a couple of new features which we haven't seen, and I'm going to describe those in a second. To understand why, okay, actually, I should have there's a couple other slides I should use. So to understand exactly why convolutional neural networks work, it's useful first to kind of discuss first why ordinary neural networks don't work, so where they kind of fail. And one way of getting a feel for that is if we look really quickly at CIFAR. So this is another data set, which we also use very commonly in machine learning called CIFAR. It stands for like I think it's made at Berkeley or something, California, I forget what it stands for. But it's a 10 category data set containing, let's see, like automobiles, ships, cats, dogs, deer, frogs. What else is in there? I think I mentioned automobiles, horses. Is that 10 yet? It's in there somewhere. I forget. Deer? I mentioned deer. Birds, yeah. Birds is another one. I think it's 10, roughly.
Let's see how many things our neural networks can recognize.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it looks kind of like this. They're really small images. They're just 32 by 32 pixels. And for this, when we want to when we want a neural network to understand CIFAR, it turns out that this is way more difficult than MNIST. And it's difficult. It's difficult for two reasons that I can start with. The first obvious one is that they're color, right? So now we don't just have a grayscale image; we have a color image, and color is generally programmed in computers as 3 digits: a red, green, and a blue value. Most people are familiar with that, generally. The nice thing about dealing with color is that actually there's nothing to it in terms of what we've already learned. All you do is you just have 3 times. If you have a color which is red, green, and blue, we just end up having 3 times as many neurons. We have, it's like 3 grayscale images that become our data. So it works just the same. However, it is a lot more input data, so that is, of course, makes the trouble a lot more difficult. It makes it a lot more difficult to kind of learn. But the bigger reason why CIFAR is not so good for neural networks is it can be kind of ascertained just looking at these cats, of course. Because one thing you might notice about these cats is that they appear in all sorts of different colors. Some of them are facing left, some of them are facing right. Some cats are curled up, some are outstretched, some are outside, some are indoors. There's all sorts of clutter everywhere. There's just way more things that are happening in these images that makes the task much more difficult. So when we were learning, MNIST, like training a classifier to recognize MNIST, we didn't have to deal with, 9s that are backwards, right? We have a very constrained idea of what digits look like. and they tend not to vary too much, and there's no clutter either. So, or other objects in the images competing with the classifier to produce a good classification. So here, there's way more diversity in the way cats will appear in these images. And if you try to train a regular neural network to predict these things, it will be really bad. I forget, like, I think that one layer neural network would have something like a 25% accuracy, which is really, that's quite low. Random guesses would be 10%. Just to, yeah.
I just thought about coding it because when you have 2 ears, you have 2 eyes, you have a certain distance, so even if you're close up, could you some kind of measure that out? And then you just say, okay, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and 2 ears. That is a cat.
That's
You know what I'm trying to say?
that's basically what convolutional neural networks will try to do. So yeah, that's kind of the approach that we'll have to take. Is sort of this idea of composition. Okay, so convolutional neural networks are attempt to address this problem, and what they do is they say, okay, well, neural networks, even multi-layer neural networks, can discover composition, and actually a good way to look at this is looking at these. So this is actually CFAR. If we did the same experiment with CFAR as we did with MNIST, where we kind of visualize the weights, they would look something roughly like this. And there's obviously you can see there's very little definition to these. Like the car is almost this kind of, I see a windshield and like it kind of makes sense. But like a bird is a green blob and a cat is a red blob. It looks almost like there's kind of ears a little bit. Do you see that? Is that me? But mostly we just see blobs, and like ships and planes are blue blobs because there's a lot of water and sky in images that contain them. But this is not going to do a very good job because it's really bland. There's very little definition. And actually what I like to zoom in on is the horse. Yeah, because the horse, it has 2 heads, yeah. Because images of horses tend to be either like right-facing horses or left-facing horses. So this is a good example of actually something really concrete that a 2-layer neural network might learn. Imagine you have a 2-layer neural network. In a 1-layer neural network, we would have a template like this, which means that a left-facing horse and right-facing horse would never quite match this because they'd be sort of, it would overlap only on one half of it, right? But what if instead you had a 2-layer neural network and you had in the first layer a left-facing horse and a right-facing horse? And then those are 2 of your neurons, and then your final output neuron for horse takes those 2 and it weights both of them highly. So if you get either or, you'll get a high score for a horse. So that's like a really toy example of how multiple layers can learn composition. But they're still kind of limited in the way that they do this in ordinary neural networks. With convolutional neural networks, what they do is something like this, and this is kind of what you'll see if you'll put this into Google Images. You'll see a lot of results that look kind of like this. This is the original. This was made by Yann LeCun, who's actually a professor here at NYU, although nowadays he's much more active at Facebook. He's like the head of research at Facebook. Like very, very famous personality in this world of deep learning, which is what these neural network research has recently been called. And he and his team produced one of the first really successful, commercially successful convolutional neural networks in 1990s. And this is the famous network they built in 1998, which was responsible for some time for classifying, I think, something like 15% of all the checks that were being processed in the U.S. So if you wrote a check in the early 2000s, it was probably processed by this thing that we're looking at. The intuition is this. We don't want to look for templates. What we want to look for is components of things. So like you said, a cat has ears and eyes and a nose, and maybe some other features. A car might have a windshield and wheels and things like that. What we want to do is we want to look for those things and then kind of combine them to get an approximation of our classes. And convolutional neural networks will allow us to do this because what they do is instead of looking for things in the whole image, The primary innovation they make is they create sort of small patches that look for objects that across the entire image. So like for example, here, this is an input that's an A, and we have this filter that's this little square, and we slide it along this whole image looking for something. This will be more clear when we look at the demo. This is just an image, but the primary thing is we're looking at a smaller scale now for things, and then sort of combining them in ways. Convolutional neural networks are everywhere, and they do everything. And this is kind of to try to motivate the discussion of these, because we're going to mostly look at them in the context of images, which is what they're best known for. But they're actually very, very applicable to other domains, and are useful for many applications besides for images. Notably, they before they became famous for images, they were actually applied very successfully in the audio domain. So they were doing speech-to-text processing. So this pane right here, this is a 2009 paper which demonstrated very successful speech-to-text using convolutional neural networks. They're in self-driving cars, and pretty much any application that uses computer vision has been really overtaken by convolutional neural networks because they do computer vision so well. And they were also notably, this is memoactin. We'll talk about Deepdream in a few minutes. But also, they were also, for those of you in March, you might remember that we had a very famous match in South Korea between DeepMind's computer, which played the game of Go, and the #1 Go player in the world, Lee Sedol. And AlphaGo won 4-1. So when I was a kid, I'm actually going to get into this later if we have time, but we thought that Go was unsolvable, and it turns out that actually it's quite solvable. And we won. So they're really, really applied in many, many different domains, and we're going to see like a sampling of them. Okay, and I want to just skip some of this. Let's see how we're doing. It's 12:27. Maybe I'm gonna do this. This will take, let's say, 8 minutes to introduce how CovNets work, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll get into CovNet applications. Okay, convolutional neural networks work exactly like neural networks, except they make a couple of innovations. They introduce a new type of layer called a convolutional layer, and actually they introduced 2 new types of layers: convolutional layers and pooling layers. Pooling layers are actually really simple, and so I'll show those briefly, and they're actually possibly obsolete. Convolutional layers are kind of the main thing here. And the way convolutional layers work is now, instead of having a set of weights that we plaster onto the whole image, or rather like one set of weights, now we'll have many sets of small weight maps. So like this is one of them. This is a filter map. And what we call a filter map, or sometimes a kernel, and it's also like we learned the weights. When we looked at the MNIST weights demo, they're learned through the process of training. So you might ask why this looks like this. It's learned so as to be successful at the task. And the way it works is that we slide this filter across the image at every point of it. And then we do this. We do a dot product between them. So that's like this pixel times this pixel plus this pixel times this pixel plus this pixel times this pixel. Exactly the same way we did it before, just in a smaller patch of the image. And the intuition is that whenever the sample of the image, the patch of the image we take, is sort of sympathetic to this particular filter, this sum will be high. Right? Again, it'll be high pixels times high pixels plus low pixels times low pixels. So that's why this response that we're looking at, the red box, shows the response of this multiplication. That the brightest parts of it appear in the sort of parts of the 4 which have sort of like northwest dark, southeast bright. Right? This is looking at for like these kinds of edges. Right? It's kind of like an edge detector. Right? We're looking for these diagonal edges, and so we find them here. And we'll have many of these. And in particular, and I actually have this demo that I'll quickly show, convolution demo. So you see that this is like, if we look through, this is online, but but you can see the kind of the way the responses work. And let me show a better one, I think. Yeah. So here you see it'll have a really high response at areas like this because it lines up a lot, right? It's kind of sympathetic. And here it'll be very dark because it's the opposite. So it'll be like bright times dark plus dark times bright. So it'll be kind of like a waste of pixels. And we'll have many of these, right? So this is like filter. There's 8 of these filters, and they all have different responses, right? And this is kind of all of them, right, in this simple case.
Is the filter the weight, essentially?
Yes, the filter is, yeah, it has a set of weights, right, which are grouped together. Now, this may not seem that interesting at first, but when we combine them, and I'm going to have a demo in another slide, which is going to show exactly why these become useful. The other thing, and I'll just mention this quickly, there's also pooling layers, and we'll see this in the demo. All pooling layers do is they downsample. And here they're called subsampling. We originally called them subsampling, now we call them pooling. All it does is it takes like every group of 4 pixels, like here, and it'll just take the maximum value of them, and that'll become 1 pixel. So it's a way of compacting the information into half as many pixels on both sides. And this is kind of how we reduce the information to something that's much more computable. So pooling is actually quite simple in that sense. Convolution is a little trickier, though, to understand. And we're going to understand it now using the following demo. And this will be the last thing we do before the break. So this is a demo, and I'm using this this add-on for open frameworks called OFX-CCV. This is an add-on that implements a convolutional neural network in open frameworks. Yeah, this is working more or less fine. Yeah.
What's that add-in called again?
Sorry?
What's it called again?
Oh, OFX-CCV.
Oh.
Yeah, so if you Google search OFX-CCV, there's an add-on I'm working on with Kyle McDonald, who's also super active in machine learning and open frameworks. And the demo, I made this a few months ago for my class. You can download the demo also. That's online. I'll share the links and everything after we get out. Okay, so instead of having 8 filters, we actually have like 96 of them in the first layer, right? And they look like this. And again, they're learned from training. We haven't talked very much about training, and we're going to kind of mostly gloss over it because there's not enough time. But if we take all of these 96 filters and we kind of slide them across the image, we get a response that looks like this. And they all look kind of different from each other. You know, some of them are looking for what appear to be horizontal lines. Some of them are looking for what appear to be kind of more like vertical lines. Others are looking for maybe like plain consistent squares. So I think when you see something like this, it looks like it's kind of looking for like areas of consistent pixels. Some of them are looking for like gradients and things like that. They all look kind of different from each other. And they're very similar to what you would hear in computer vision called Gabor filters, which identify sort of edges and things like that. And then there's a pooling, the normalization layer, which I haven't talked about, simple thing. It just makes it 0 to 1. And then pooling, which takes it and reduces the pixels. So this looks like it's the same, but it's been downsampled. So now there's 1/4 as many pixels. And then we do another convolution, and another pooling, and then another convolution, and another convolution, and another convolution. Now it's starting to get really abstract, right? And actually, let's go to the pooling. The way to understand this is that in the first layer, when we did the convolution, we were detecting like edges, right? And they were kind of interpretable, things that looked sympathetic to the filter map. When you do another convolution on top of that, you're almost applying something like an edge detector on top of an edge detector. So it necessarily takes on a more abstract meaning. And there's really not, I still haven't figured out a very good way of explaining this. It's something that takes a lot of intuition. And you get used to it after looking at these enough times. But like what's happening here is that we're building these what are called feature detectors. And when I say detect, I mean in the sense that like detect in the sense that the brighter it is, the more it's detecting of that feature. So all of these filter maps are trying to look for a particular kind of feature, and they light up when they see that feature. features are a very abstract term. So like in the first layer, a feature is just some series of edges or a gradient or something. Features in multiple layers now have a more abstract meaning, and they might apply to things like features might be like a feature detector might be looking for a hubcap, or an ear, or a whistle, or something like that. They're looking for like components of images, and they're able to learn how to look for those by basically following this path through this series of maps. Kind of, it's like, it's hard to describe. This is not going to be very satisfying, I'm afraid, because there's just not enough time. Again, this is the short version of a class that I did that was much longer. So if this is something that you want to get deeper into, I'll show you all of how to do that after we get out of this class. But the short answer is that this is looking for features, and some of them are more interpretable than others. And I like this one. This is feature 32. It appears to be looking for my face, right? As I move around, it kind of sticks to where my face is, right? It's kind of lighting up a face. And I'm not sure it's necessarily, some of these look similar to that. Maybe this one.
Your face in the upper left corner, so that's why it keeps lighting up there too.
Oh, that might be, is it this
Yes,
one?
yes.
Oh, sorry, is this one? Yeah, possibly. It's hard to say, but definitely one of these neurons is probably looking for faces. And it is spatially organized, right? So this is like in the image.
You can get to a meaning with this neural network in essence.
Yeah, that's what it's looking for, interpretable things. And some are more interpretable than others. Sometimes you see something very specific, like faces and wheels and things like that. Sometimes it's looking for things that are a little bit like less specific. So like there's a really nice video about this by Jason Yosinski and some of his collaborators, where they basically made software that looks just like this. This was modeled after that software, actually, where they basically show interpretations of visualizations. And sometimes, like one of the examples they used is it looks like it's responding to clothing, but it's actually responding to wrinkles. So like a wrinkle detector. There's another one that was like a text detector that was detecting text inside of books and things like that. Something along those lines. Now, the reason why we do this is that as we go through the network, this data, we've gone from this to this through a series of transformations, and this data is far more meaningful to a computer than this is, because it's responding to these abstract objects which we find meaningful, faces, hubcaps, and so on. And so as a data vector, as a vector of data, this is much more valuable and will be much more useful in doing things with it. And what we do at the end, and this is very typical for convolutional neural networks, is we take the final, after we've done our final convolution or our final pooling, we will take all of these neurons and we'll recombine them into a fully connected layer. A fully connected layer is what we call, when we looked at the ordinary neural networks, that's what those are. Those are fully connected. We call them fully connected because every neuron in one layer connects to every neuron in the next layer. So we'll do that at the end, and we get something like this. And I've drawn it out as a rectangle, but really it's just a big column of neurons, right? I drew it for convenience, so that it would fit in the screen. I made it a rectangle, but each of these cells is like a neuron. And then we can do it one more time. We can add another layer. This is very typical for this network in any case. There's a second layer that will add a fully connected layer. And ignore these for now, just a second. I just want to describe first this. This vector of data here, right? There's 4,096 of these in this particular network. You might ask why 4,096? The answer is there's no reason. It's just the architecture of this specific network that was found through discovery. And one thing you'll notice is that as I move around, these stay pretty consistent, right? It's not as noisy as like a color image, which is changing all the time, like based on superficial things like the lighting changes, or, like I change my, my orientation or something like that. Like something like that. This stays actually pretty robust. And that's because these dots all represent these sort of high-level abstractions which it's responding to. And in doing so, it becomes this meaningful vector of data that represents the image, and we can use it for various things. And I'm going to show you a few of those, mostly after the break. But the most obvious thing that you can do with it is use it for classification, which is what we've been doing, which is what we've shown for most of our networks. So at the final layer of this is a 1,000 layer classifier, which is trained on a data set called ImageNet, which has 1,000 classes of images. And this is classifying them. So like this will actually, like this usually works pretty well with the phone. So if I put my phone in front of it, you see it's classifying iPod. Cellular telephone. I think it works pretty well with remote controls, I want to say. Remote control.
So much remote.
I know, right? Oh, can that clock come up? I'm gonna try the clock. I've never tried this before. Let's see. Yay! All right, great.
Scaling weighing machine too.
Yeah. All right, great. That's a nice one. So the thing is, it won't. Yeah.
Is that the one that Tom McDonald was using when he was walking around?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, actually, no. That was something separate. We might have enough time to chat about that, but yeah, also very similar. So it is a convolution.
I want to see.
Oh, so yeah. Window shade. I'm not
Measuring cup.
measuring cup. Not bad. Beaker.
Okay.
Shower cap.
Breaker.
Abacus. We got abacus.
Hamster.
And usually, actually, the first time I pulled this up, I had long hair, and it was like.
Wig. And hairspray.
And hairspray, right?
Shoe shop.
Shoe shop.
Lobster.
Lobster.
You get a lot of necklace with you.
Yeah. And window shades, yeah. So the thing is, it doesn't understand everything. So it only has 1,000 classes that it's trained on.
It doesn't know what your beard is. That's why it says neck brace.
Oh, maybe. That could be. That's an interesting interpretation. Yeah.
They said what?
Neck brace. Yeah, it comes up with neck brace a lot. When it's showing, when you're looking at things that like, it doesn't have anything for like person or whatever. So yeah, it kind of fails at that point. Yeah.
I'm just very curious when I see those crime movies on television and they say face recognitions and you see a rear blur. Is that for real? Can they really do that, or is just that in television?
We can do face detection. There's definitely face recognition going on. How accurate it is another story.
Because
So-
you see they do it very fast on TV.
Yeah, I think that like in crime applications, there's a really good artist named Heather Dewey Hagborg who actually taught the first machine learning course at ITP. And anyway, she's really into like law enforcement applications of emerging machine learning technology because a lot of times like law enforcement agencies and governments are a little over anxious to integrate these things before they're really accurate. And so she does a lot of like really interesting work on that area. Yeah.
There was an article a couple weeks back about the NSA pulling faces out of the crowd at a very, very high percentage. So you might want to look at it.
Yeah.
On a related note, there is also makeup for beating those facial recognition things.
Yeah, right. So I'll show you one more quick thing, and then we'll take a break. This is just a little demo at some point I made that would basically search Instagram for whatever it finds. So I hit the space bar, goes analog clock, and then will this work? Oh, maybe not.
More Instagram, guys.
Yeah.
No, this was working yesterday. Let's try it again. Maybe it doesn't like when there's multiple words. Oh well, okay, so it's not working. Sometimes it works. I'll have to fix that. Okay, we'll skip this. Let's take a quick break, just like 5 minutes, something like that, and then we'll come back and get back into it.
So,
Okay. Okay, everybody. So let's get back to it. So this is kind of where we left off. I'm going to skip this confusion matrix. Okay. We just talked a little bit about convolutional neural networks, and we looked at the pipeline that produces classifications. Now let's talk about applications of convolutional neural networks. And it turns out that there's a lot of really interesting ones, and some of the ones that we're about to look at right now are actually the ones that kind of made this thing, kickstarted the process last year of making these cross over into the mainstream, sort of, and became really, really popular. One of the first attempts to try to understand what's going on inside of convolutional neural networks was done by right here at NYU by Rob Fergus and Matt Zeiler, who were two researchers. And they did these experiments visualizing convolutional neural networks, and they did the following things. They first isolated image patches, parts of images, which responded highly to particular weights. So what that means is, like, for example, looking at, and actually I have a better, let's look at this. So for example, these are the first layer weights of their convolutional neural network right here. There's like a sampling of 9 weights, right? Some of them are gradients and lines and edges and so on. And these are the 9 weights. And then this grid right here, which contains 9 segments, each of which has 9 samples of image patches from real images, which respond highly to these weights. So like you can see that these are actual parts of actual images. They're very small, so you don't really see much in them. But they're parts of actual images which produce a high response from these weights. So it's detecting things, and you can kind of make sense of it, right? So this is like a sort of diagonal line. You see a lot of diagonal lines here. This is a green gradient being detected by this, and so on, right? And it should make sense, right? We were talking about sympathetic filters and image patches. In the second weight, though, or in the second layer of convolution, the features become more complex, and the image patches become a little bigger. And we don't really need to look at the weights anymore, because now they can't really be visualized, because number one, they have 96 dimensions, and also because they're built on top of other weights. So the sort of like, it makes no sense to visualize them anymore. So we kind of have to use our imagination. But we can still do these experiments where in the second layer convolution, we can try to isolate parts of real images which respond highly to those weights. And if we do that, we see that it begins to acquire higher, like progressively higher, sort of more abstract significance. So in the second layer, you'll start to get more complex patterns, sort of like, so here I'm seeing like a sort of, a bunch of, like a grid lines or something like that. Here we see sort of semicircles or rings. I don't know what these are. They're like almost like craters or something, maybe sunsets. And you see that like these images are sort of thematically tied, and they may have differences in color or other sort of superficial characteristics, but they're tied together by sort of like the kind of dominant features that you see. And going farther down the chain, looking at ZF3 now, you see that the images become even more complex. So things like wheels. This neuron is looking for wheels now. This one is looking for like sort of like honeycomb lattices or something like that. This one is looking for maybe people. It's hard to say. This one is like coffee cups or something like that. I'm not sure about this one. This one really throws me off. It's there's like a flower, and then there's some, I think, cleavage and a hummingbird. So I'm not really sure what's going on in this neuron. It might be responding to something like that you can't really tell. So in any case, sorry?
Like a wedge shape?
Maybe, something like that, yeah. I don't know. It's some of these are more interpretable than others, pretty much.
Smoke and
And you can also do these neat experiments where you look at like how the responses to the activations change when you occlude parts of the image. So for example, this is a Pomeranian. It's labeled as a Pomeranian. And we have this gray box that we can slide around to occlude parts of it and then measure the response of the Pomeranian class. So if we move this thing in front of its face, the correct probability of that class diminishes, because we've covered the part of it that like makes it think it's a Pomeranian. So if we cover its face, the probability of it being classified as a Pomeranian goes down. And then you can do a similar thing with this wheel. So this is a label as a car wheel. So if you block the car wheel, it will go down in probability. This one is neat though, because look what happens. So here, this is an Afghan hound, which is this, and the probability of classifying it correctly actually increases when you move the gray box in front of the guy's face. Right? Because here, right, it has a high probability. And the reason is because maybe the guy's face is actually competing with the Afghan hound classification. So it's kind of distracting the network. So these are just like different visualization techniques. This is what's called deconvolution and guided backpropagation. There's not enough time to really talk about these, so I'm gonna fast forward through these. These are very interesting in the research and definitely should check out. Okay, so this is where things start to get really interesting. So around this time last year, in fact, just about 1 year ago, June 16th last year, this was posted to the machine learning Reddit channel, and it's this crazy image of like a weird slug or something. And all that was posted was an image generated by a convolutional neural network. And this inspired a great deal of commentary on Reddit, a lot of comments. And just a few days later, it was followed up by a blog post from Google who had revealed unmasked themselves as the people who put this photo online. And actually, like, this was told to me by Mike Tyka, who was involved in Deepdream, that it was just leaked by somebody in Google. So that was the end of that, I suppose. And so the blog post was very interesting, and the engineers responsible for this, or the researchers responsible for this, are Mike Tyka, along with Alex Mordvinsov and Chris Olah. And some people might know these names if you're interested in the field. Chris Olah has a really great blog about machine learning, explaining concepts in machine learning, which is really, really highly recommended. And it starts by asking a few really simple questions, and people in the research had been also already asking this at that time, but this kind of brought it to more mainstream attention. So oftentimes what we do with convolutional neural networks is we send in an image and we observe the activations. And we might send an image of a dog and it will be like, okay, I'm 70% sure this is a dog, I'm 20% sure it's a cat, I'm 5% sure it's a bird, I'm 1% sure it's an umbrella, or something like that, right? Well, that's interesting, right? But what if we inverted the question, and rather than asking what activations go with what image, we ask what image goes with what activations? Like, for example, what image, if you sent it through a convolutional neural network, would be 100% dog, rather than just 70% dog and 20% cat? Like, what would an image look like that made a neural network go, this is definitely a hartebeest, or this is definitely a measuring cup, or an ant, or so on, right? So these are synthetic images that were produced in order to maximize the response in the neuron, which is measuring this. So for example, like the banana one is really obvious, right? So like this image, if you fed it to a convolutional neural network, would go bananas for banana, basically. And this one would be for screws and starfish and ants and things like that, right? And it's synthetically produced in order to maximize those activations using this optimization technique called Deepdream, and I'll talk about Deepdream in a second. We're not going to get to really talk about it in much detail, except for kind of what I mentioned. But it's a very interesting technique because it really allows us to have fun with these things and produce images that have various properties that we find to be interesting. This one I really like, parachute. It looks like there's a person in there, right? And that's because if you're Google and you have tons of images of parachutes that you train your neural networks to recognize, a lot of them have people in them, right? So it'll kind of the network will just learn to associate a sort of person hanging off the parachute. And I should say also before getting into where's that? The new class viz. Is it this? No. This has gotten way better recently, and I have a slide for this. Dream. I want to show you these before I forget. Deepdream. Because this is something that is really very much worth seeing. Here we go. It's this image, class synthesis, Deepdream. this was just from a couple weeks ago. So this is the newest sort of research in this. And this had a lot less fanfare, which is really interesting because, Deepdream happened last year and received a lot of publicity. And now I guess it's kind of old news. But the crazy thing is that in 1 year, if you compare this, this to this, it's crazy. Like we're synthesizing images which are really approaching uncanny valley territory, right? Like this is like we ask a neural network to produce an image of a cell phone, and that's what it looks like. And this is an aircraft carrier, entertainment center, jeans, French loaf, cloak, triumphal arch, a badger, swimming trunks,
I like
running
how
shoes.
Thinks that French loaf also looks like a butt.
Yeah, right. So yeah, this has gotten way better in 1 year. This is from just 2 weeks ago, I think. Nguyen and Yosinski and some others. And so this is like our ability to hallucinate images automatically is becoming pretty remarkable. But Deepdream kind of first demonstrated it, and what Deepdream was, and raise your hand if you heard of Deepdream. Almost everyone, right? So Deepdream was big news last year, around this time, and what Google demonstrated was this trick. What they would do is they would use the technique that we just looked at, where you are able to do these, and they applied it to real images. So in this, the process for generating these is you start with an image of noise, just white noise, just random pixels, and then you look at the activations. And then you want to amplify the activations. So you want to adjust the pixels so that high activations become even higher. And there's a trick for doing that, which is beyond the scope of today, so we're not going to really talk about it. But you can do this instead on real images. Instead of starting with a noisy image, you just start with a real image and adjust the pixels so that whatever activations it finds, it will sort of double down on them. So like if you have an image of a cat, it will make it even more of a cat, and that's kind of how Deepdream works. So, like for example, if you feed in some pictures of clouds, it will produce images like this. So this is the pig snail, the camel bird, the dogfish, and the interesting thing you could do also is that like you're enhancing activations, but you can do it at any layer of the network, right? So you can say, okay, it's finding cat. I want it to be more like a cat. But you can also do it at the low layers of the network. So where you're just looking for edges and gradients and things like that, you can prioritize those. And if you do that, you'll get images that look like this. So here's some hartebeests, and they have it accentuate the sort of low layers of the network, and it produces these sort of pretty gradient patterns, which are really neat. Mike Tyka was one of the researchers, and we recently had him here. I'll discuss that in just a bit. But he did these really awesome experiments where he would feed in just raw noise, and the network's going to find something. If you feed it a thousand just random pixels, and it's trained to recognize object classes of 1,000 types, something's going to be the highest, right? And so if you do that, it will just begin to produce just pure machine hallucination. And he made lots of really amazing pictures that look kind of like this. And you should definitely check out his blog if you're interested in seeing more of this stuff, and he describes a little bit how he made it. I'll just show you like some of the things that I did with Deepdream. So like I have as you can see, I'm a fan of Indian iconography. I spent a lot of time in India, so like I took this image of Vishnu, and like this is what you do after one iteration of Deepdream. It just finds this weird stuff going on here, right? Like. Do it again, and again, and again. Oh, that's it. That's all I had here. So it's an iterative process. Yeah. So it's this iterative process, and it will produce these really amazing, crazy images. And I kind of applied this to different paintings: Claude Monet, Egon Schiele, Edvard Munch. These are some fireworks that I took. This is around July 4th last year, so like I did some of these experiments with fireworks. Yeah?
So in the fishing thing, it's just seeing something that it thinks is like a cat and it says I'm going to run with it and stick a cat in there? Or did you tell it that you wanted certain things in
it just it will find whatever it finds, and it will try to make more of it. Yeah. You could, though, do something like that, too. There are experiments where you try to produce a cat.
And so like the cat, the fish, dog, or whatever, what were they going for? Were they going for fish and they just got the dog in there, or were they going, how did that work?
Oh, because that's a little hard to describe. It's like, it has these, you see these archetypes a lot because, it's not, it's doing this to the whole image. So there might be regions of the image that look more like a cat and regions of the image that look more like a bird. And they get these archetypes a lot because certain patterns of pixels tend to produce co-occurrences of different classes. Something along those lines. That's kind of the best I can do in a limited explanation. Yeah?
Are you using like a set collection of classes that everyone's using? Because like it has to have
Yes.
definition is all coming from someplace.
Yes. That's a good question. So I'm using a network that was trained on ImageNet. So oftentimes, like you can download pre-trained neural networks because it takes a lot of horsepower to make some of these really good ones, like in terms of machinery. And so some of these are available online, and I'm using like a built-in, a one that's available online that was trained on like 1 million images, something like that. Things like this. This is from Burma. So I just started doing it on like vacation photos. This is one of my favorite places in the world. It's called Jaga. It's in India. Deepdream Da Vinci. I really like this one because like the dogs kind of appear in the steps. So this is like, and this was really inspired by like Mike Teka's work. So he did this thing where he would repeatedly deep dream an image and then crop it, and then deep dream that and then crop it again, and then deep dream that, and kind of do these like iterative zooming in experiments. And they look kind of like this. So it's just, a fractal, never-ending deep dream, like machine hallucination kind of thing.
Almost like powers of 10.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. Like, it'll do this forever, basically, and come up with different things as it goes.
Where does that rainbow pattern come from?
Everything that we were just. It's hard to encapsulate that. Yeah, it's just it's doing that process over and over, and it's really hard to. It's very dynamic, very chaotic, kind of hard to predict. And these are just different experiments I did. You can do things like where you will try to oscillate different layers at different times, or different regions of the image, and so you can get a little bit of diversity. But for the most part, if you were paying attention to Deepdream last year, you'll see a lot of stuff that looked like this. Pretty much, a lot of dogs. That was the puppy slug phenomenon. Yeah, exactly. Because it was trained on, it was using a neural network which mostly was trained in images. So that's the thing. This is something that Kyle did, and we mentioned that he was also very active in this stuff. So he produced like class visualizations. So like the ones that I showed that Google put into their blog post. So this is like a similar idea. So you start with like a noisy image, and you try to tease out all of the different classes. This is actually a low quality image. Yeah, kind of looks like this. So they have lots of snakes and birds. So this is pretty neat. And this is just some more work that Mike Teka did, and he realized that like you can produce really high quality ones by using some regularizing techniques like a bilateral filter to kind of reduce. This is maybe a little too much more detail than we really need. But yeah, pelicans. Doing different things like that. And then I got pretty tired of Deepdream because this was like all of last year in July. It was just like Deepdream, and at the end, like my cappuccino looked like this to me. And pretty much I knew I had to stop at that point. Okay, so the next thing is style transfer. And style transfer is, I think, my favorite, and this is the one that I did the most work. I spent kind of the most time on, and actually I've been recently revisiting it. Style transfer, and I have a new demo that I'm going to show, which is neat. Hopefully we'll explain style transfer a little better. It's related to Deepdream, and it uses a similar technique, but now we have two images. Instead of one, we have a content image and a style image, or what we define as our content image and our style image, and then we produce a new image which has the content of the content image and the style of the style image. So for example, this is right here, the middle one. is we're using the content image of the Mona Lisa. So I took the most iconic, sort of the most neutral photo I can find. Exactly, and the style image is Starry Night. So we reproduce Mona Lisa in the form of Starry Night. And then this is sort of Cubist form, and then this is Impressionist Charles Monet form. And style transfer was initially demonstrated last year, still less than a year ago. So all of this is nothing like this had been seen before. This was demonstrated about a year ago, last August, in this paper called The Neural Algorithm of Artistic Style by Gattis, Ecker, and Bethke. I'm not sure if I'm saying the name right. At the University of Tübingen. Anyone German or speak German? Tübingen.
Yeah.
Okay,
My wife studied there.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, this was first demonstrated at the University of Tübingen, and they wrote this paper, and then there were a few implementations that came out afterwards, and this is how it basically works. And I'm going to actually try to explain this through a demo that I have. So let me style transfer. Yes. Okay. I hope this works. Oh, crap.
That's for
why is that not working? F style transfer. What's going on here? Okay, you know what? Maybe I don't have enough time to do this. I have to fix this demo, so I'm just going to describe the math instead. It's actually not as bad as it looks. The math, the reason why I made the demo is because it makes the math, which looks otherwise complex, it kind of makes it a little simpler. So let me just try to describe what's going on, and then this demo will be ready in a few days. So, so we're trying to create this image, right? And it starts off as just, we create an image the same size as the content, and it has random pixels. And then we are able to produce the restyled image using this iterative process, which does the following. We're trying to minimize this loss function, this loss formula. And we have three images, P, A, and X. P is our content image, A is our style image, and X is the new image that we're creating. And the loss is a sum of the content loss between the output image and the content image, and the style loss, which is between the style image and the output image. And there's this trade-off. There's these parameters that we decide which one is more important to us. The content image, the content loss, is actually really simple. All of those activations that we saw, we looked at that demo that shows us those black and white pixels that show us the activations of these things. We take the content image and we take the output image, and we take their activations, and we find the distance between them. Simple distance, like a Euclidean distance. This formula looks complicated, but it's just Euclidean distance, right? It's like the distance formula. So it's every pair of those minus the other squared at every layer. It's really simple formula, but it's computed over many hundreds of these, or thousands even. So that's pretty straightforward, and it should make sense, right? Because if they have the same content in the same places, they'll have the same activations, roughly. So that's the content loss. Style loss is a little trickier, and it's still, to me, really hard to believe. And actually, the researchers who first made this, they also say they don't understand it fully. So it's not just me. So that's a good thing. The intuition, it works like this. So it's also a function from the activations, but there's one more step. They take the style image and the output image, and they take their activations, and then they compute what's called a gram matrix. And the gram matrix is this, and it looks complicated, but it's actually just a big matrix which takes every pair of filter maps and takes their correlation, and which is just like a dot product or a cosine similar. I forget what they use exactly. I think it's just a dot product. But yeah, it's the correlation between every pair of feature maps. And then you take that representation and then you do a distance formula. Now, that may seem kind of weird, but it should kind of make sense, because what the gram matrix has inside of it, the way you can understand it is that it has the correlation between every pair of feature maps at every layer. And so for some reason, which can only be described as witchcraft, this is a really good way of understanding the style of images. And in two images which have similar ground matrices will have a similar style composition. So so that's the style, and then yeah, you kind of add them up. And then this works in iterations where we constantly adjust the pixels slightly so as to lower both the content and the style loss. And you can't really do, like there's a trade-off between them. Like not necessarily, there's not necessarily one image that maximizes the, like there's a, you can try to reconstruct the style or the content. It's impossible to do both perfectly. And so we kind of have to use alpha beta to decide which one's more important. Let me just show you a whole bunch of these. So this is like just a whole bunch of paintings that I took and I applied to the Mona Lisa. And Hokusai is a good one. A lot of Indian artists. And actually, Tarsila is my favorite. This is like the heads. And he's a Brazilian artist. And Liechtenstein. And the thing is that like it appears to work for nearly everything. And it's really unintuitive for me because it feels like to me like style exists on many different scales in many different ways, and so it's really difficult to kind of like understand why this works so well. I started using things besides for paintings, so like Aurora Borealis, Arabic calligraphy was a nice one, the Crab Nebula, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Google Maps. QR codes, the Rosetta Stone. It just works all the time. Ryoji Akita, TV signal noise. I applied it to video, and let me show you the actual video. So I took a scene from Alice in Wonderland, and I did this basically frame by frame.
My dear, as you were saying.
Oh yes, I was sitting on.
So this is like Picasso, and you see that there's like a little noise frame to frame. This is low frame rate. It's like 12 frames per second. And I was able to get some decent smoothness because it's a very chaotic process, so you don't get a lot of consistency frame to frame. This has changed very recently, and I'm going to actually show you some new work in just a minute.
Why yes, I'm very fond of tea. But
S.H. Raza.
When I've been trying to ask you.
I have an excellent idea. Let's change the subject.
In a way, it feels like
Yeah, right?
Riddles?
So yeah, that was done. This one's super viral for me. So like this last year, and even Jan McCunn, who I mentioned, shared it. So this is like one of the style transfer works that kind of was in a lot of the media. So yeah, style transfer, pretty amazing, right? And you can do it in HD now. So this is like really large style transfers. Hokusai applied it to a tree, or like Arabic calligraphy were the two that I used here. So it's done in very large images. And yeah, Mr. Div times Gustav Klimt, just doing more video stuff. And the thing you should notice with the video is that it's a little unstable because like frame to frame, there's no guarantee that the features will kind of persist in the same area. This has changed in the last month actually, and I have some new work to show you that actually isn't even online. So you guys are going to be the first ones to see it, in fact. Or I should maybe the third or fourth people to see it.
We're the first class.
First class, definitely the first class to see it. Style interpolations. There's Picasso through his blue, African, and Cubist periods. So this it's another attempt that I made. And yeah, and just some feedback experiments that I want to kind of pass through. I also want to show this quickly. Like, what if you set the content, how important the content is to be 0? So you don't care about content reconstruction. You just have a style image. So now this is just pure machine junk.
Whoa.
So just weird sort of style remixing. Okay, this is what I'm going to show you, and this is oh, I exited out of my slides.
Props to using
for everything, yeah. I use it for everything, yeah. Let me go back to that video. Okay, so while I'm describing this, or while I'm doing this, I'll describe it really quickly. So just 1 month ago, roughly 1 month ago, there was a new style transfer technique that came out, which was able to demonstrate it applied to real applied to videos. So instead of frame by frame, which is the way I did it before, you can apply it to all the video at the same time, and it uses a third loss term, which uses optical flow. Yeah, and it tries to penalize like having too much optical flow in correspondence to the original video. So that looks like, let me just pull that up for that MP4. As you see, I have a very descriptive title. Okay, so first of all, this is, let me just show you the original. So this is an image I took. I live along the J train, and I got this really nice shot last year, right around like 5 p.m. when the sun is kind of glinting off the Lower East Side. This is just right off the window of the J train, and yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. It's perfect timing, like, you know, the sun is kind of hitting the buildings and so on. So I decided to use this as the source, and so now this is a few different styles applied. So this is Hokusai. And at first it seems a little noisy, but then when the buildings come out, you'll see how consistent it is.
Now, when you say optical flow, is there an optical flow algorithm going on, or is it actually using the compression's native information for
It measures the optical flow initially. Let me just mention also, this is Basquiat. And Basquiat was Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was very active in the Lower East Side. So I thought this is maybe my favorite. This is like, let's say he plastered graffiti all over it. Google Maps. This is great. The markers become windows. Can you check this out? And actually, this one and the next one's Starry Night. This is what's really cool. Actually, I'll mention this since So this is the Starry Night one. The last two that we're looking at, they literally, I think, finished about 20 minutes ago. So I have them running in an Amazon cluster, and they were scheduled to finish right around now. These are early drafts of it, so you do it in iterations, and they get better. So this is like iteration 12 or something. It's going to look mostly the same, but the last one just finished now. So like it not only isn't online, it literally finished during this course. So that's kind of a neat thing about it. But anyway, yeah, it computes the optical flow initially. And then I haven't read the paper yet, so I don't know exactly, but I think it tries to maintain the same optical flow in the output video as with the original video. So it kind of penalizes deviations, something like that, yeah. I have not seen anything like that, but that's next. Definitely. I wouldn't be surprised if you see that within the next few months or next year or something like that. And I would also imagine this will be very prominent in like textures for gaming and things like that. There's a lot of applications because a lot of these can be produced in real time. And actually, I'll show you one more thing. I'll revisit style transfer. Okay, let's because we're running out of time. So here's what I want to do. We'll do generative models and basically the rest of the material of machine learning for artists in 20 minutes, roughly, in the next 20 minutes. And then I'll come back to and introduce you guys to ml4a and also this event that we had called Alt-AI. Was anybody at Alt-AI? One person? Anybody else? Okay. So I'll just mention Alt-AI later. Do you have a question?
Yeah. What's this last thing called?
This is called style transfer. And like the thing we're looking at is like a video style transfer technique that was demonstrated in a paper about 1 month ago. So this is super new, like 1 month ago. The paper and the paper and their code.
Is this your own implementation?
No. Yeah. The implementation. So the implementation that I'm using was made by the authors of the paper. I have this all online. Like I'll post the video and it'll have links to all that. The implementation itself is also based on another previous implementation, which is the one made by Justin Johnson, who made one of the original style transfer implementations, and he just added an optical flow loss term to it. Yeah, the implementation for this is like, it's pretty serious. So it's not for the faint of heart. Like and it's also in Lua, which is a really weird like programming language for me anyway. I don't know if a lot of you use Lua. So yeah, that's kind of the state of things. A lot of this stuff is moving, like becoming almost 100% Python these days with TensorFlow and things like that. So I would expect to see more of that.
Is this
No, it's just like you call it style transfer, but actually it's really literal, right? It's taking an image, transferring that. So could you do something similar as what we did with all the cats and dogs and birds, where you maybe try to boil lots of different impressions or
lots of cats and dogs?
boil a lot of different, let's say, images down to this is how many treats an edge, this is how many treats an animal, like light, exactly, so that it wouldn't. So you know that you wouldn't have like a Google location pin as a window, but you would have sort of
like basically making a neural network for recognizing
the style of
Monet
the pin,
and then
but
generating Monet from that and using that for style transfer.
Like you mean to use like multiple sources of style, so to like get like the essence of a style or something?
Yes. So that you know, in your Hokusai example, everything's a wave, but even when it's not a wave, you know, you could probably abstract it a bit more.
Yeah.
And just sort of, it looks like it was painted by him, but it's not.
Yeah. One way you could maybe do that is in style transfer, you can actually use multiple styles, and all it really does though is because I'm recording.
Browser's using random taking up spots with your browser.
I need to. What's that?
If you close your browser, you'll also save some swap or any program.
Let me actually just pause this. I hope that works.
Crisis.
Oh, I exited this again. Let me quickly do something trick. Slides. So you could use multiple styles, and then what it does is it averages the gram matrices, and I'm not sure if that would do exactly. It might work. Yeah. I mean, I use multiple styles. There is some sort of a like interesting work in going into like style recognition and decomposition and things like that. You have a question?
Think about if you have a movie of daylight. The one we were showing from the subway was daylight, and then you have another movie in night. You convert that to actually not doing an image, but actually doing a movie from another movie.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen any movie on stuff.
So
Yeah.
because you have a daylight and then you have a night somewhere in Arizona, and then you put those two together and see what comes out of that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah. Okay, let's
How would
move.
you say this compares to, for example, Pixar's tool where they figured out, oh, you can render CG and then apply style on top of it? This is a much more automated version of it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I don't know what that tool is, but
The tool is more like a large process.
I'm guessing that there's just way more manual oversight. And one of the things about this is that like what really interests us about this is the idea that it's being done by a neural network. Because, you know, like we can animate in the style of Hokusai, that's not new. It's more that this is being done, understood by a machine that I think has captured people's attention for the most part. Let's talk about t-SNE. T-SNE is really cool. So t-SNE is a technique for dimensionality reduction in data. See, I'm doing it in time. Okay. The rest of this is going to start getting fast because I want to kind of get through a bunch of slides and give you a survey. I'm basically giving you a survey of the course that we taught here. And I'll show you the materials for getting deeper into it. So t-SNE is this technique for dimensionality reduction that was invented by this guy, Lawrence van der Matten and Jeff Hinton at the University of Toronto. And it does dimensionality reduction. So suppose you have a data set, looks like this, you know, let's say in Excel or something, and it has 1,000 columns of data. What t-SNE does is it takes those 1,000 columns and it crunches them into 2 or 3 columns, which preserves the distance relationships between the points. So like if you have a point in 1,000 data points that is similar to another point in 1,000 data points, they should be similar to each other with 2 columns. So it's kind of trying to find the optimal representation of a data set in 2D, because if we do that, we can then visualize it by plotting it according to those 2D points. So I'll show you that visualization. Okay. So suppose you have a whole bunch of random colored points. That's 3D, and we want to visualize them in 2D. So we want the colors to be similar colors to be near to each other. So this is kind of there's a video I produced which shows t-SNE colors, the 3D converging to 2D representation, and it looks really neat to watch because it also, all of this stuff in machine learning tends to work in like using these iterative optimization algorithms where they adjust just by a little bit, and this is the way it looks for t-SNE. So it finds a sort of like, it groups them slightly and then it kind of like wiggles around and it finds this like sort of sweet spot and then it just kind of coagulates. I love watching this. And it groups similar colors near to each other. Now this is neat because it's just we can see it because we used the points represent colors, but in 1000 dimensions, this is different. We don't have some way of seeing that, but we do have a way of grouping it into 2D. And t-SNE is useful with, actually I'll show this. Yeah, okay, let's just get straight to the gridded stuff. So here's what you can do with t-SNE combined with a convolutional neural network. So let's say we have a whole database of images, and we observe all of their activations through a convolutional neural network, and then we extract for each one that last layer. Remember that rectangle just before the classification? There's 4,096 numbers, and those 4,096 numbers form a sort of signature of the image, like what high-level features it contains. And we can use those as a sort of feature vector, and if we pipe those into t-SNE, we can reduce them from 4,096 dimensions to 2 dimensions. And in doing so, we'll be able to cluster images according to content similarity to each other. What that'll mean will become very clear in the next slide. Just there's one more step. So t-SNE does this unordered thing where it just makes this 2D layout. You can then take an unordered 2D layout, like this, and then assign it to a grid and there's 2 implementations of this that I've used. One is by Kyle. I mentioned Kyle does a lot of open framework stuff, so OFX assignment will do this in open frameworks for those of you using open frameworks. There's also a nice implementation in Python by Mario Klingerman called Rasterfairy, and they do basically the same thing. They create grids out of unordered points. And if you apply this in the process, if you do this to images, you can create something like this. So this is a huge grid of images from a data set called Caltech 256, which contains animals, and it will group animals according to their similarity. So here I have, ostriches and llamas and dogs and gorillas and flowers, and they're all sort of grouped together by the actual, here's an elephants cluster, bugs, and you see they're grouped by similarity to each other, and not by color or by superficial characteristics, but like what it is. And that's really fascinating, right? Because this is read by a convolutional neural network and then autonomously organized according to content, right? So that's pretty neat, I think. And lots of people have been playing with this in other image sets. I made an example of this in open frameworks. So if you, for those of you using open frameworks, OFX t-SNE is an add-on I made that does t-SNE in open frameworks, and there's an example that a lot of people have used to make these. So I have an example of how to make these. So if you want to cluster your vacation photos or something like that, or any group of photos that you wish to see in this kind of layout, you can do so with that example in OFX t-SNE. And I got a bunch of contributions actually. So like one was from Golan Levin and a student of his, Aman Tiwari. A lot of you guys probably know Golan, very active in media art world. And this is IKEA's catalog. And I think IKEA's homepage should look like this. Right? Wouldn't this be a great way to like navigate IKEA? There's an artist named Olivia Jack who took street views of Bogota, where she lives. So I started, just seeing a lot of contributions like this. Mort Steffner, who clustered Impressionist paintings.
What's the resolution of these images?
These are actually, I think, the resolution of this big image is small because it'd be too much memory otherwise.
Right.
I don't know what data set he used, so I'm not sure. Zach Lieberman, who made open frameworks, satellite photos. which is pretty cool. Blair Neal, these are grocery store items. So like, now this is one that I made recently, and actually I need to get out of this and show you the bigger one. It's Caltech. Yeah, I think it's this. Yeah, okay. This is all of Caltech 256. There's 30,000 images in here. And there's a really awesome part of this image that I'm going to show you. Okay, I just have to find it. I know roughly where it is. Hang on, there it is. I think I see it. Okay, there's a cluster of images here which contains, okay, let's see here. So Buddha, Jesus, where's Jesus? Here's some Jesus. Superman, and unicorns. So there you go. That's the unicorn cluster of Caltech 256. All the unicorns in one place. Who would have thought? You can also do this with text. So t-SNE, I've shown you image applications, but you can also, it works in any feature vector. So this one, I took a whole bunch of Wikipedia articles, and actually this is online. So if you want to look at, if you go to genekogan.com, works, you can just go to the index page actually, and then go to wiki t-SNE. And then this is basically, I have the code for making this, so if you're interested, there's an IPython notebook. And it's Wikipedia articles from a page of political ideologies, and they're all analyzed using a technique called TF-IDF, which analyzes word frequencies, something along those lines, and then clusters these articles according to the similarities of their word frequency vectors. So for example, this cluster right here is a bunch of feminism articles, so postmodern and radical feminism and anarcho-feminism. The anti-feminism and masculism appear right next to each other, which I thought was kind of funny. There's like I think there's a Marxist cluster here somewhere. Nationalism.
Oh, there's Marxism.
Yeah, there's a Marxist, somewhere here. So yeah, and there's fascism, some Christian stuff here, Zionism, there's an anarchist cluster here. Yeah, here's a bunch of anarchism. So this is pretty neat. So it just analyzes the content of these articles and then groups them according to their sort of similarity. And then you can click into these, and these will actually bring you to the actual articles. So that's a neat little project. You can do this in a lot of different ways, and it works in a lot of different domains. Okay, I have to start rushing. So we're going to go through autoencoders that people do like 10-year PhDs in this. We're going to do it in like 5 minutes. Yeah. So an autoencoder is a type, or in general, generative models in general are this type of architecture for a neural network in which we make the outputs identical to the inputs. So we train it on a training set, and then we try to make it create the exact same thing on the output as on the input. And this may seem kind of screwy at first, because then all it's doing is it's reproducing the thing that you put into it. So it's basically the world's most expensive ×1 ever, right? But actually, it's really interesting, because what we do is we set these things up so that we constrain the network in one of the middle layers to be really small. Let's say it just has 3 neurons or 4 neurons or something. And actually, if you make it 2 neurons, you can use it in the same way as t-SNE. You can use it to plot, which is kind of an interesting facet about it. But the reason why this is interesting is because, remember, neural networks form compositional models, right? And if you do so where you form a compositional model which reconstructs the input into an output, and does so in a way that constrains all of that information to be contained in just 3 neurons in the middle input layer, then this thing here becomes like magic. It becomes these like 3 numbers that control the production of like new forms of this image set or something. That's a really, really hand-wavy explanation. I apologize, but that's kind of the best we're going to be able to do. Let's just get into the eye candy. It's going to be stick figures. Okay, so you can basically, what you can do is, this is trained on this faces, labeled faces in the wild or celebrity faces, and which are labeled like smiling, bald, mustache, and so on. And these images are generated by the autoencoder. So these are not real faces, as you could probably tell, right? They're just generated from tagged images, and the autoencoder learns the representation, which is able to then produce fake faces, basically, according to these different categories. And some of these might be, I mean, they're kind of strange, I suppose, and maybe a little apropos. Like if you want to look at what constitutes attractiveness in this data set, you probably won't be surprised. And that's kind of like a neat thing about these is maybe they reveal a little bit about us and like how we label our data, and how these are all very interesting facets of machine learning that we haven't touched at all today, just because there's not enough time. In my class, there's a lot more discussion of this kind of stuff. So if you're interested in those dimensions, then you'll find a little bit more to look out for. I'm mostly focusing on the art applications. Okay, so these are fake bedrooms. Yeah, these images are hallucinated by a neural network, trained on fake bedrooms, made by these guys, Alec Radford, Sumit Chintala, and Luke Metz. Sumit's at Facebook also, and Alec is now at OpenAI. And they used what's called a deep convolutional generative adversarial network. Yeah, that's the name of my new band. The deep convolutional generative adversarial networks. I don't have enough time to explain what it does, how it works, and I don't really understand how it works either, actually, to be quite honest. But what you're able to do with it is it's very similar to an autoencoder. It's able to generate images that look like the data set that it came from, but it does so learning this sort of generative feature space that you can control, and which is difficult to describe exactly how. But for those of you who have used processing or something similar, you might be acquainted with Perlin noise. This is like Perlin noise, but times a million. It's like Perlin noise, but on this sort of generative space. So like these bedrooms, you can take this what we call a z vector, or like a z space. That refers to that like middle layer, which is really small, and we can kind of like twist the gears a little bit and change different aspects of the images that it's producing, and we can create these interpolations. So this is like going from one bedroom smoothly into another, and you see that like doors turn into windows, or picture frames turn into beds, and there's sort of like this like it finds this sort of interpolation through this generative space where every image appears real, but it kind of morphs into one from the other. And it's not just like crossfading, it's actually changing things, like changing windows into doors, right? And and you could do arithmetic on them too. So like it's a generative space, so you can add those vectors together. So you could be like, okay, if you have a bunch of pictures of a smiling woman, you can take the generative vector which produces neutral woman, subtract that, and then add neutral man. And then what it will do is it will produce a smiling man, right? We've subtracted woman and added man, but then the neutral cancels out, so we're left with smiling man. This is really kind of like if you've looked at Word2Vec stuff, this sort of arithmetic and generative space is really sort of in vogue now in machine learning. You can do this in text also. So if you've seen like word analogies, like king is to queen as man is to woman or something like that, that's a similar kind of thing that's going on. You can put sunglasses on people. So this is like a man with glasses. Now we have woman with glasses. And then you can do these crazy uncanny valley like face interpolations. Alec made these. And I'm just going to show you a project that I worked on. I'm going to skip just because we're running out of time. I took MNIST numbers and I generated interpolations of them, right? So that like is changing the numbers into, it's literally interpolating numbers. Like literally interpolating. I like that, like calling it that. I did this project with Chinese characters called A Book from the Sky. And I wish I had more time to talk about this project. It was a really fun project. I found this data set of handwritten Chinese characters. These are actual Chinese characters that were handwritten for the purposes of optical character recognition research. And I put them into this generative model and I started producing fake ones. So like these pairs, the left one is real, and the one on the right is generated by the machine. And even if you don't read Chinese, you can probably tell that like some of these, like especially that one and this one, they look pretty bad. Like complex characters really don't tend to work very well. And I was showing this to a friend of mine named Francis Tseng, who's also done a lot of machine learning work. Some of you may know him. and he also happens to speak and read Chinese. And he told me about this project called this book called A Book from the Sky. Has anyone seen this before? It's a work by this Chinese artist named Xu Bing. Where does anyone read Chinese? Can anyone here read Chinese? Anybody? Nobody? Oh, a little bit. Okay, just a bit. I'm only asking because if you do read Chinese, you'll recognize that these characters are not real. Right? These are fake characters, and he produced thousands of these and put them into a museum. These are on display at the Met for a while, actually, and they maybe still are. So I named the project after this. Francis told me about it. And actually, I learned, this is cool for me because I was doing research on two fronts. So like there's the machine learning front, which is always there. I didn't know anything about Chinese. So for me, like I learned all about like radicals, for example, and you'll see that in 2 slides. So just producing fake Chinese characters and doing these interpolation, like do the Perlin noise thing where you kind of adjust the z-space a little bit and observe like the different ways that the neural network thinks to create these characters. These are real characters. These are the actual characters. And you can do interpolations among them. And these, I probably have too many on one slide. You should maybe like focus on one of them. And you'll see that it like generates like very authentic sort of like nice interpolations between groups of related words. This is all online. This is on my website. It's one of the first links. So it's called A Book from the Sky. And this is, Chinese characters are made up of radicals, which are like root characters. There's about 214 of them. And I highlighted them in this case, where if you have a group of characters which share the same radical, it appears to preserve the radical during the interpolations. I kind of cherry-picked. It doesn't really do that all the time very well, but it does in these examples reasonably well. And so I included that. And this one is the arithmetic thing, and this is going really, I usually don't include this in bigger talks, because this is like going a little too far, but like if you try to, like maybe this is the character for queen. It's not actually, but it's a nice little thought experiment. King minus male plus female. People do this on flowers and manga. This is made by other people. This is made by this guy, David Ha, who combined autoencoders with generative models and so on. Okay, recurrent neural networks. I think we're just going to have to skip, basically, because there's too much. I have a whole lecture about recurrent neural networks. I'll just describe them really quickly. Recurrent neural networks are a really special category of neural networks which change their state as you put inputs into them. So with the kind of neural networks we've been looking at so far, it's always been like, you put in a vector of information, you get out a vector of information, and it doesn't change the network itself. Now it has this hidden state, which is a function of time. So you put in inputs, and it changes that state. And in particular, the way it does that is it's a function of the input and the previous hidden state. So every time you put in a new input, it updates the hidden state. And the reason why this is interesting is we can set it up in like this, where we kind of like set the neural network up to predict sequences of data. This is what allows us to operate over sequences of data, which are not even fixed in length, which is kind of a nice property about them. And if you've seen a lot of this like text bots that are generated, they're all using recurrent neural networks or LSTMs. This has been kind of big in the literature. So like this is fake Shakespeare. Why Salisbury must find his flesh in thought, that which I am not apps, not a man and in fire, to show the reigning of the raven and the wars, and so on. And this is kind of like just fake Shakespeare that is being produced by a recurrent neural network which has been trained on the entire corpus that Shakespeare wrote. And you can produce your own ones, like you can make bots that kind of make fake XML, make fake code. This is fake code. This is fake math. This is total absurdist math. Fake recipes. Prepare sour cream into egg coloring. Drain first pans in a large bowl. Add the flour and seasonings and season with 1 teaspoon of flour mixture. Add spices. And like it's using ingredients that it didn't even list. It's like totally absurd. When ice cream can be softened dumplings. And then Twitter bot of Deepdream. This is Donald Trump, Twitter bot. Yeah, exactly. I trained it on my email. I trained it on my Gmail. So this is like an email bot that writes emails like me. I trained it on some Shakespeare, and Kyle did a cool thing where he trained it on emojis, which are also text files. They're just SVG files. Mario levels. A sci-fi assistant writer made by this guy Robin Sloan, who made really like a bestseller book. And this is a recurrent language which assistant writer, so it gives you suggestions. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, lots of really, and there's tons of applications. This is really good for language modeling. This is a joke slide. Yeah, this is like you can do like expect in the next couple of years for language translation to take a huge step forward. So like if you look at Google Translate right now, I think in the next 2 years, it's going to be like a quantum leap forward because it's been demonstrated very well in small cases that sequence-to-sequence translation using recurrent neural networks is really effective and get rid of all of this crap. So this is like the way that translation works now is it forms these like lexical trees using all this natural language processing, and then it translates each part individually and then recombines them, and that's like, and it works to some degree, but it's really it makes lots of assumptions about like the structure of language that are really difficult to stay consistent, and so that's why Google Translate works the way it does. Sequence to sequence says like just is a statistical brute force statistical way, and might probably work much better. You can do captioning images, and you mentioned someone mentioned the thing I think that Kyle. You mentioned like what Kyle did. So Kyle was using this implementation of captioning images that they took out on the walk. So you can take an image and describe it in natural language using a combination of convolutional and recurrent neural networks. Just too much to really go into right now, but yeah, these are just captions. A man in black shirt is playing guitar. Construction worker in orange safety vest is working on road. These are annotated by neural networks. Yeah?
This my brain is working because you see you have a script and then you turn it into a movie without even having access to anything.
Yeah, right, and that's actually, that's the reverse, right? And someone's doing, oh yeah, this is what you mentioned, this is Kyle's thing. So he's just annotating the live webcam feed. So you see what's going on here. So it's pretty neat, and you can see it's like it's not exactly the most accurate thing in the world, but these things are always getting better. And actually, like, and you can do dense captioning now, which means different parts of the image. And again, this is a lot of work at Stanford going on. They have a really great computer vision group. So annotating images. This is all more science stuff. Handwriting bots. These are handwritten by a neural network. You could do, okay, this is the coolest thing. I'd love to see this in a few years. This does sequences to images. So you can take a caption, like a stop sign is flying in blue skies, and generate an image from the caption. And it's in its infancy, as you can tell. A herd of elephants flying in the blue skies. A person skiing on sand-clad vast desert. A toilet seat sits open in a grass field. So this is kind of like, this is in its infancy, but I think you'll see that in the future. I'll skip draw stuff though. Yeah. This is done by David Ha. This is a recurrent algorithm which draws fake kanji. So these are all fake characters. Okay. Then the last, this is, I'm going to skip this just because there's no time. So I'm just going to mention, and I'm going to show you this class. The last lecture that I did in my class was all about games. And reinforcement learning, which is this branch of machine learning, which is concerned with like programming agents to take behaviors in game states. It's a really, if you were watching the whole AlphaGo thing, okay, so I'll just show you like really quickly. We trained neural networks to beat Atari games. So like I'm fast forwarding. So Pong, Breakout, and whatever, I forget what this is called. And we're training AIs to learn how to play these games. And the crazy thing about this is done by DeepMind, which is a group at Google. The craziest thing about this is that it learns, it's one algorithm which learns to play any Atari game. So you don't tell it what the rules are. You just give it the screen pixels and the joystick. And that's it. and only the pixels. There's no information encoded about the game. It's just that's all it gets, and it learns how to play them, based simply from trying out things and figuring out what the reward is, and then doing more of the thing that gets you rewards. Yeah, very much. Yeah, I think so. So that's reinforcement learning in 3 seconds. That's a branch of machine learning. So I'm just going to skip that. This is all in bigger lectures, longer lectures. This is like learning how to balance a pole. There's a machine that learns how to balance a pole. So after a while, using reinforcement learning, 236 trials, and it's like, yes, I can balance this pole. So these are all things that are working. This was Deep Blue, so chess, when we beat chess. And this actually doesn't really use machine learning per se, but I used it in the slides because then we used machine learning to beat Go. And Go was the most recent thing that was a really big news. And it actually kind of updates the way we approach solving chess, and we beat Go. And Go is really crazy because the number of Go boards is like so vast that you can't compare it to any number in the observable universe. So that's really interesting in and of itself. Go is really hard to solve, and we did a good job at beating it, and it actually gets much harder with other kinds of games. So those are the slides. So what I'm going to do now, you guys have like 5 minutes. I'm going to show you some things, how to sort of keep up with the material and some things that have happened recently. And I forgot to show, I'm going to show one more thing. So this is real-time style transfer. Okay, check this out. Hang on.
All right.
Right, so this is basically doing a real-time cubist style transfer. And I use this, again, there's a style transfer technique that works in almost real time. On the MacBook, it takes a quarter second or so to produce a picture. So this is why it has this kind of latency. And the cool thing about this is that style transfer, even a few months ago, took maybe 15 minutes to make one image. This works in one forward pass. And it does so by reducing the quality. So you'll notice that the quality of this is much less than the quality of those. But it works at near real time, which means that we can use it in almost real-time applications. And I actually used it recently at an event called Alt.ai. And I'm going to show you a highlight. I installed this as what I called Cubist Mirror. So I just took like a LCD screen made by OpenFrame, some of you guys might know, and put a camera on it, and then put it in an art gallery. This is an art show. So people can kind of interact with it. What you're looking at is some highlights from an event called Alt.ai. If you weren't there, how many people heard of it? I'm curious. So there was some. So this was an event that I helped to organize at the School for Applied Computation, SFPC, and we had a bunch of speakers. It's alt-ai.net. We had these speakers. I mentioned some of them actually in the court during the talk. And we had a big art show. We had workshops, and we had an exhibition also. So we had a whole bunch of artworks from a lot of people. We had something like 40 people in the show, which was really cool. It was a 3-day event. We had talks and workshops and so on. It was really fun. We're collecting the highlight reel right now. We're making a highlight reel, and we did interviews and talks, and all of that stuff is going online really soon. If you're interested in hearing about that, you can just join the mailing list. We don't really send very much mail, just especially now that the conference is over. And it was basically a conference about artificial intelligence and art. And you can also watch the talks actually on the live stream link. So just in case you're interested in seeing. This is a really cool event for me because it was the first time I ever curated a show. And we got tons of entries, and there's definitely been like this. A year ago I would have thought you're crazy if you told me that 40 people would submit machine learning inspired artwork to a conference on such short notice. But that's kind of what happened, and this was less than 3 weeks ago. It was May 20th, 22nd. So that was a lot of fun. And the last thing I'll mention is ml4a. So this is something I've been working on since the beginning of the year, roughly, and it kind of started as a staging ground for my notes for the class that I just taught at ITP. but it's become a sort of bigger project in scope. And what this is it's, and you can go to the secret index page. It's not that secret. Most people who know me know about it now. But like if you go, the neural networks chapter is the closest to being finished. And it's basically a book that talks about all of this stuff much slower. So we talk about neurons and some of the math and get into what neural networks are. And all of these images are actually like, this is just an image right now, but it's going to be an embedded interactive demo. So you can kind of play with it and click on it and see how the network responds and kind of use this as a way of learning how neural networks work. This is a really big initiative for me, so I'm going to be working on it for I'm sure, the rest of the year and longer if it's successful. But I'm writing all of these chapters now. And also, there's a whole bunch of demos in here that are in JavaScript. So like, for example, this is a CFAR confusion matrix. So you see here that like what we're doing is, this is classifying CFAR images, the airplanes and the birds and stuff, and we can look at like, these are cats that are correctly classified as cats, cats misclassified as dogs, birds misclassified as ships, and so on, this kind of stuff. We can do the same thing for MNIST, right? And I have all these demos, and we haven't looked at most of them, but these are kind of like, actually we've seen a fair number of them. But these are kind of interactive demos that are dispersed through the book and then also listed here. And then the last thing is I wrote we're also going to have guides. These are not yet on the website. Guides are going to be practical tutorials, so like practical guides for implementing various things, code samples, IPython notebooks, open frameworks examples, and just like lots of materials that are cleanly annotated and things like that, instructions for how to set up like cool machine learning experiments. And everything that I talked about today, especially the stuff that I talked about really fast, was covered in this class that I just did here. It was just a 7-week class in the second half of this past spring semester, and I recorded all the lectures and I put them online. And they're also like for example, if you go to the introduction, they're broken out into segments, and it's just an unedited, basically screencast. You can click into these. So this, I just put this online. Oh yeah, so that was the day that I put that online. Actually, I just mentioned that in the lecture. That's kind of neat. And I have class notes with it. The cool thing about this, and for me, this is the first time that I've like committed to putting all the lectures online. And I get better as I go in this. So like the last few lectures are actually probably the best ones, because they're kind of well prepared for, I suppose. And these were the topics that we covered. So there's neural networks. There's one lecture on Wekinator. So we talked about Wekinator for like 5 seconds. There's one lecture about Wekinator, how to use it. Actually 1.5 lectures. So it kind of bled into this one. Then we talked about convolutional neural networks. I had one lecture about recurrent neural networks, and then one about game stuff and deep reinforcement learning. So these lectures are all here. The videos, you can download them. The notes are here. The notes contain links. There's just a lot of materials that are kind of being updated. And then the book is going to be something that I'm hoping to put the index page and the first draft online in the front page like this month, I hope, and then kind of keep working on it throughout the year. And it's going to be something like a platform that I'm hoping is open to collaboration. I'm already working with Francis, who I mentioned, is helping. We're like writing the book together now. And in the future, it could become, it's either going to be like a book that kind of stops and, book is finished, or it might become a sort of bigger, longer-term open source project. So that's something to look out for if you're interested in getting into the field. And because it'll be open to collaboration, contributions, and things like that. And that's ml4a. There's a Twitter account associated with this that I just started working with. It's ml4a_. There is an underscore there. Make sure you notice that. This will be like tweeting like different tutorials and links and current events and news and artworks and just everything that's sort of appropriate for the material of the class. And I'm also constantly sharing this stuff as I go. I'm on Twitter, sharing this stuff, Gene Kogan on Twitter. And I make a big habit of sharing my process as I go and sharing the source code and things like that, and making lots of tools and things like that. to kind of share with people who are interested in the field. So I think that's roughly all that's really in this. Is there any questions? Like, I know that the last half hour was a huge sort of rush. Are there any questions on some of the materials? Okay. Then let me. Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about your background and how, like, just your general overview of what you do with yourself now?
Sure. That's a loaded question. Right? That's a big question. I was born in. Yeah, I mean, I studied applied math in college, and I kind of got into machine learning later. And I'm actually not. I've only really started coding when I was like in my mid-20s. So I was mostly sort of paper and pen originally, and once I got into machine learning, I figured I had to start coding, and I started doing processing in open frameworks after that, and got better at coding, and then machine learning kind of re-energized last year with all of the sort of what's been going on. Nowadays, I'm like kind of wear multiple hats, so I usually say I'm an artist because that lets me do whatever I want depending on. Though I don't take the label too seriously. I'm not usually found in galleries or openings and things like that. So mostly like that's a red herring, I guess. But yeah, I teach a bit and I'm writing a lot and I do some commercial projects here and there to kind of subsist. But for the most part, it's like a lot of machine learning stuff and online dialogue and communities and things like that.
Cool.
Oh, and also I'm teaching a class called the Neural Aesthetics, so that's this, except longer, like over 4 weeks, at the School of Ma, which is in Berlin. So if anyone's in Berlin this summer, come hang out. That'll be in July. Yeah, I hope that answers your question succinctly. My website has a lot more info, so like if you're interested in more, a lot of this stuff has been shared online. So like Alt-AI, which I just mentioned, and ml4a and Cubist Mirror, those are all recent things. The style transfer stuff. I also, like, before I was doing a lot of machine learning, I did Connect Project Toolkit, which was something that I think a few people kind of maybe mentioned knowing. Yeah, and I'm online in all these places. I'm on pretty active on GitHub. Yeah, something like that. Okay, then I guess we'll wrap up and I'll kind of hang out for a little bit. And yeah, for those of you who are interested in this stuff, feel free to like email me if you have any questions or you want to try something out. And definitely like keep up on Twitter and ml4a. All this stuff will kind of be going online as I go. And yeah, if you're interested in this, but like much slower and much more like comprehensive, then the class will definitely, like the lectures from ITP should be useful. Okay, so thanks for coming. Yeah.